Now you're live. Okay, Chair, that's now live.
Thank you. I'd like to begin by welcoming those members of the public and press who are watching the live stream of this meeting. Members, you are by now aware of the need to keep your video camera switched on for the duration of the meeting and to keep your microphone muted, except when I invite you to speak. Please click the raise hand function if you wish to ask a question or comment. Can I remind members and officers and public speakers that all virtual meetings will be recorded and that these recordings will be published on the GCP YouTube channel. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Can I ask Democratic Services to report any apologies for absence received?
Thank you, Chair. No, there are no apologies to report.
Okay, thank you very much. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest from Executive Board members, please? If so, please raise your blue hand. I'm seeing no blue hands. I'll just remind all members that they can declare interest either at the start of the meeting or if they forget at the start of each relevant agenda item. Agenda item 3, minutes of previous meeting. Can I ask the Executive Board to confirm the accuracy of the minutes of the last meeting? I'll do the same as last time and just take it on block. If anyone's got a problem with the minutes, could they please raise their blue hand now? I'm seeing no blue hands, so therefore I assume that there's agreement for the minutes, and I will sign the minutes as a correct record when I'm able to do so. Agenda item 4, the Executive Board membership report. Sorry, apologies. Executive Board membership. That's in the agenda pack, pages 17 to 21. So I'm going to handle this. There's a letter from the Business Board Chair, and then I'll ask the officer to introduce the report, and then we'll have the Executive Board debate. So we've received a letter from the Chair of the Business Board, which formally proposes the recommendations agreed at the Business Board meeting on the 19th of October 2020. This was not available when the agenda was dispatched, but has been circulated to members and published with the agenda papers. Could I invite Rachel Stopar, Chief Executive, to introduce the report, please? Rachel, hi.
Thank you, Chair. So this report in front of you considers a request from the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Business Board concerning its representation on this board. In essence, the request is to nominate 2 representatives of the Business Board to be co-opted members of the GCP Board, rather than the 1 representative as set out in your terms of reference and standing orders. Should you wish to accommodate this request, it would involve a significant change to your governance arrangements, which are enshrined in the constitutions of the 3 local authority partners which make up the voting members of the GCP Board. The City Deal document that formed the basis of the City Deal contains a number of references as to how it was envisaged the governance framework might operate. While the City Deal document referred to the possibility of a GCP Executive Board members being the Council Leader, the LEP Chair, now the Business Board, and the University Pro-Vice Chancellor, this did not feature in the subsequently agreed governance arrangements, presumably to provide flexibility for those bodies responsible for appointing or nominating GCP Board members to determine who was best placed to represent them. Therefore, the Business Board has discretion over who it considers most suitable to represent the business community on the GCP, and it is not required to be the chair. The request to add a second co-opted member from the Business Board falls outside the scope of the current arrangements. If the Executive Board is minded to support this proposal, it will be necessary to submit a report to each of the constituent councils, seeking their approval for this and asking them to make the necessary changes to their constitutions. Following discussions with yourselves, we've informally advised officers at the CPCA who support the Business Board that if the Business Board was minded to nominate 1 co-opted member and 1 substitute member in line with the approved composition of the Executive Board, there would be scope for the GCP Chair and voting members to use existing discretion available to yourselves to allow the substitute member to participate in meetings. Despite extensive attempts to find a way forward, CPCA officers have advised that the request as currently defined be presented to the Executive Board for your formal response. Therefore, the recommendations in front of you suggest that the Business Board is asked to reconsider this matter and make a nomination that is consistent with the GCP Board standing orders and terms of reference. But also, in order to try to achieve the outcome the Business Board is seeking, you may wish to use the discretion available to the chairperson and voting members to allow both the Business Board nominee and the substitute member to attend the GCP Executive Board, should the case be made to do so. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Rachel. I understand what the report says, but in your introduction there, you said there had been extensive attempts to suggest a way forward on this. Can you just elaborate on that?
Yes, effectively, once we realised what the decision of the Business Board had been on the 19th of October, I entered into discussions, first of all, with the Chief Officer that supports the Business Board to let him know that what they'd agreed was outside of the GCP's governance arrangements. He said it wasn't a matter for him, so I then emailed the Chief Executive of the CPCA on the 21st of October to point out the difficulty and make a suggestion about how we might be able to accommodate their intention, but it did require a change to what they were asking us to do.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'll open it up to the board now, if I may. Would anyone like to make comments on this at all? Councillor Herbert. Lewis.
I mean, I think we're trying to be accommodating, and that includes welcoming James. But I think we just got to try and find an agreed route on this. I don't see the need for Cambridge City or the other councils to have 2 reps. I don't see the need for the university. I think also what's happened, and I'm probably an anachronism, because originally it was the case that the leaders took the positions, and somehow they wanted me to be chair to start with as well, and I didn't quite understand that. But then everybody else except for me in the nominated positions, including the university and the LEP, at the beginning changed to someone who is going to be able to give it time, because there's a lot of detail in these issues, and also to generally be within the remit or the area of Greater Cambridge. So I think when we did have the chair of the LEP, I did make representations that it wasn't the best way of getting input, and generally we've benefited from one business rep and somebody who's got, if you like, a skin in the game in terms of what's happening. So personally, I hope that the combined authority reduces its request to 1 and helps us resolve who that one is.
Okay, thank you, Lewis. Neil. Neil, you're on mute.
I promise not to do that again, Roger. I promise.
Oh. I never promised that.
Look, I think the chief executive explained the context of the governance very well, and I think if we can go back to the business board and ask them for a single co-opted member, and the recommendation to chair, if you're minded to do so, to use your discretion on a substitute, I think that would achieve the desired outcome of the business board within our governance arrangements. I do echo what Lewis says about the amount of work associated with the GCP, and obviously the business board is a sort of key participant in it, and we need to make sure that we've got that continuity, I think, of a single point of contact for ongoing arrangements with the GCP board. So I'm supportive of the recommendation.
Thanks, Neil. I've just got to have a quick message myself on the workload, because obviously Lewis is absolutely right. This was originally meant to be leaders when it was the old city deal, and the workload soon ramped up. And Lewis is an enigma. He's the only one left. But of course, since then, we've also had the combined authority, where the leaders of all the authorities are meant to go on. And Lewis is doing that as well. I mean, Lewis, I don't know if you have time to sleep, but well done. That's all I say, because there is huge workloads in what's come on board in the last few years in this area. James, you're on mute.
I will do it again. So remind me. I think we're making a bit of a meal of this. You know, this is nothing to do with the combined authority. Lewis mentioned the combined authority. This is between the business board and the GCP. As far as I was aware, the business board consulted with the GCP. That was where the two members' idea came from. That's now been thrown out, so they're going back again. I think the business board will be happy to put forward what you want, but you've got to be clear and say what you want. You know, but I think I'm right in saying you are the only city deal in the entire country without a representative of the LEP on it, and I think that's something that, you know, I'm not sure whether your decision making is legal without that. I don't know what the reality is around it. It seems very strange to me that you had the chairman of the LEP on, the government pulled funding from the LEP for the reasons we won't go over historically, but we know they did. And since then, there has been no LEP representative on the GCP at all. So I think if you offer clarity to the business board, they'll come back.
James, I very much appreciate that. I think, as the chief has said, we have indicated a way forward to try and accommodate everyone. And that's the beauty of having you on here as well, because obviously you can take that back as well, and I'm sure we'll get something sorted. Claire.
The business board is absolutely entitled to propose someone of their choice, so I don't think that's a problem. I'm absolutely fine that I'm not their choice. I was a LEP representative at the time when I was asked to come and do the role. Just for clarification, a couple of points. I don't get to see the business board notes. I haven't stepped down from Cambridge Network. I've stepped up, if anything, in order to give me more time to do things like this across the wider region. And I do absolutely respect the request that was slightly unexpected not to communicate with business board members, so the links have not been as strong as they used to be. I think being replaced by two people would obviously be hugely flattering, no problem with that, but I think it would unbalance the board somewhat because nobody else has two representatives. Austin is a great guy. He's from Walsall, which he knows very well. He doesn't know Cambridge, and therefore I personally, and I know many other business reps around the region, would highly commend Andy Williams, who has lived here and worked in startups through medium scale companies through to the international companies. So I don't have a strong view about it, but I do feel you need to know where St Neots Road is in Hardwick, and you need to know where Histon Road corners are. It is quite a detailed role, as well as trying to be strategic.
Okay, thank you, Claire. And obviously a lot of us know Andy from Andy Williams from the Assembly. So thank you for that. I've got no one else that wishes to speak. I'm sure we'll find a way forward quickly on this. So we'll have to work together, make sure we do in the next month or so. So going back to recommendations, we've got recommendations A and B, which I wish to take together. Can I ask if anyone has a problem and wishes to vote or abstain on A or B? Could you please raise your blue hand now? I'm seeing no blue hands. Therefore, I take it on affirmation that A and B is carried. So thank you very much on that. Moving on, agenda item 5, questions from members of the public. There are 16 public questions relating to the following agenda items. Agenda item 8, we have 9 questions on Campbell to Cambridge. Agenda item 9, future investment strategy, 2 questions. Agenda item 10, city access, 2 questions. Agenda item 12, greenways, 1 question. And agenda item 14, Chisholm Trail, 2 questions. Details of these questions have been published and are available for both members of the Executive Board and the public to see. Questions will be read out by the Governance and Relationship Manager or asked by the questioner themselves at the start of the relevant agenda item. Moving on, agenda item 6, feedback from the Joint Assembly. So Councillor Tim Bick is in attendance as chairperson of the Joint Assembly to provide an overview of the meeting held on the 10th of September. Councillor Bick, are you there?
The meeting was on the.
I was just reading that, and it was a lot more recent than that.
It was on the 19th of November.
Yes,
Yeah.
I know. You may have noticed I hesitated as I read it out, thinking that doesn't sound right. Never mind.
Seems a long time ago, but not that long.
Okay, please continue.
So Chair, I just wanted to highlight that you have a written report of our proceedings. I would take that as read, but would like to speak to the points under items 8, 9, 10 and 14. So if I could come back when you get to those items, please.
Certainly, and if you could raise your blue hand, that would be great, Councillor Bick, at the time. And if I don't see it for any reason, just shout. Okay.
I'll do my best.
Thank you. Okay, has anyone got any questions for Tim Bick that isn't covered in 8, 9, 10 and 14 later on from his report? No, I'm seeing no hands. So on that basis, we'll move forward. Thank you, Tim, for that report, and obviously we'll speak later as well. Agenda item 7, quarterly progress report, and this is introduced by, first of all, I'll ask the officer to introduce the report and then the executive board to debate it. The report is being introduced by Neve Matthews, Head of Strategy Programme. May I ask, Neve, if you could introduce the report, please?
Yep, sure. Thank you, Chair. So just before I do, just to introduce Sarah Hayward, our finance lead from the county, take any detailed questions on finance, and Gemma Schroeder, who's here from the SMART team for any detailed questions on that stuff. Gemma's got some technical issues today, so is not on camera, but is with us in the room. So different to usual, or different to often, if that's the right way to describe it. We aren't actually asking the board to consider any specific recommendations on this report today, but I might just draw your attention to a few kind of points in the report, if that's okay with you, Chair.
Yes, please do.
Thank you. So there was a pretty detailed discussion at the Joint Assembly, and I know Councillor Bick's going to run through some of that later, on some of the key issues across the programme, including apprenticeship start. So I just wanted to pick that up because we did go into it in some detail at the Assembly. We didn't have the data at the Assembly, and we need to do some refining around it now with some of our partners. But what we think we're seeing on apprenticeship starts now is about a 40% reduction in apprenticeship starts for September this year compared to September last year. So as I say, some finalising we need to do around the numbers, but it's looking at that. It's looking like that. So that, you know, fairly sobering to be kind of reading this stuff and dealing with these numbers. But I guess all the more kind of important actually that the skills service that we have out to tender at the moment is underway, I suppose. And just kind of on the skills service, on that procurement piece, the window for the procurement is due to close this Monday, the 14th, and officers will update the board as soon as we have a kind of completed the initial assessment process to give you an idea of the direction in which we're going. Just as we move through the report, we talk a bit about potential implications from COVID on some of the program. Specifically, I just wanted to draw your attention to the AV trials. The second period of lockdown has actually, the second period of lockdown and the subsequent restrictions, I should say, mean that progress on the AV project has been slightly delayed. We do expect the team to return to Cambridge on the 5th of January to commence the project again. And if the company are keeping us well up to date, and we'll continue to keep the board up to date as that progresses. There are a couple of other issues that the Joint Assembly discussed in detail, but I think they are sort of substantively covered in the subsequent agenda that you've got in front of you today. So if I leave the report there, Chair, and very happy to take any questions that members might have.
Neve, thank you for that. Board, any questions, please, for either Neve or Sarah or anyone else? Neil.
Just unmuting before I speak. So thank you, Chair. This is not so much a question, but I just wanted to pick up on the point as the sort of lead, the GCP on the skills working group. This point which Neve made about apprenticeships and engagement with students, which I think is really, really important. And I actually had the privilege of attending a conference which was run by Form the Future earlier this month, looking at the sort of skills agenda and taking stock of the current situation. The RAND report, which is mentioned in section 9.1, is actually a very good report. GCP, I'm pleased to say, partially funded that, I think, along with the combined authority. It's a good piece of work. It's worth reading for board members. But one of the things which leaped out at me there was this sort of growing problem which careers services are having in terms of getting engagement from businesses, in terms of looking at apprenticeships, experiences for students and so forth, which is not surprising in the current environment because many businesses are focused on lots of other important things, including survival. But it does shine a light on this importance of sort of bridging this attention gap between students who are desperate for opportunity and businesses who've got their minds on lots of other things, and the role of careers advisors and the sort of thing which the GCP is doing and the combined authority are doing to create those links and make sure that young people actually see the opportunities which are available to them and do not get completely deflected by short-term problems which are facing them and the economy. So I just wanted to underline what Neve said, endorse what we're doing. I think we've taken the right step there, but say that I suspect this is a space which we need to watch very carefully over the coming months. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil. Thank you for those comments. Claire.
Just say businesses are trying really hard to help with the new starters, interviewing and onboarding virtually, but obviously managing them physically whilst they are very stretched in many cases. Businesses trying to keep up with business as usual, and that includes taking on new starters. We're holding careers fairs, etc., to try and encourage them, but it is obviously quite hard work at the moment with lots of people not in the office. And the second point was on the smart agenda. We have made good progress. However, it is obvious that people are not particularly looking for the bus mappings and signage that they were a year ago. So trying to keep those up to date and used more and more is proving quite difficult as well. But really pleased with some of the progress that's made, and I support everything in this paper.
Thank you, Claire. Anyone else wish to speak on this at all? I'm seeing no one else. So going to the recommendations, the Executive Board is recommended to note progress across the GCP programme, which I think we've done. So thank you very much on that. Okay, moving on. Agenda item 8, Campbell to Cambridge, Better Public Transport Project. So I'd like to state how I'm going to handle this agenda item in this order. We'll have the LLF feedback, then a representation from a member of a partner authority, public questions to receive the officer response to those questions. Then I'm going to bring in the Chair of the Assembly, Then I have an officer to introduce the report, and then we'll have the debate for the board. So in that order, if I may, I'd like to invite Helen Bradbury, the LLF chair, to report on the outcome of the LLF meeting held on the 8th of December, a couple of days ago. Helen, are you there? I can see you've come up on the screen. Helen, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Ah, there you are. Yes. Hello. Welcome.
Hello. Blimey, it sounds like you're going to be here till midnight on that agenda.
Well, I'm not going to comment on that. So please, off you go.
So the Campbell to Cambridge LLF met on Tuesday evening via webinar. Yet again, I've got to bring up process. We were given an unreasonably short timescale to prepare and hold the meeting, just 5 days, despite my having raised the issue in a letter to senior management of GCP in June. Although your reply quite correctly stated correct process had been followed throughout, that misses the point, because 25 to 30 elected members representing larger bodies such as parish councils cannot reasonably operate in this manner. Since 2017, I've repeatedly raised the issue, as I'm sure many of you know, and how our outcomes feed into other GCP bodies. And yet the situation, I feel, is as unsatisfactory as ever. So, you know, if you're interested in the considered opinions of elected representatives, this needs to change. It is clear from the papers that GCP want to get C2C done, but the LLF believes this is not driven by the but the LLF believes this is driven by the timescale of Bourne Airfield and West Camborne, and that the GCP are not focused on developing an effective transport scheme that complements the multi-billion-pound east-west rail investment at Camborne, nor that is optimal for a future autonomous CAM, nor that takes account of COVID. These very considerable constraints were thought to have been trivialised in the latest reports. The impact of East-West Rail on travel patterns and the business case for C2C drew heated debate, particularly the statement on page 67, section 6.22 of the papers. It is unlikely that East-West Rail will have an impact on the core business case for C2C. Councillor Ruth Betson, District Camborne, asked whether the GCP had considered an integrated solution for all transport options arriving north of Camborne, and was told this will be developed when the station location is decided later next year. As our resolution 1 makes clear, it is unanimously thought to make sense to wait for that. C2C is very expensive and expected to provide its payback over a 30-year time period. So people west of the city want the outcome to be optimal. Similarly with CAM, the idea that the preferred alignment is optimal for this scheme was again questioned. In June, Councillor Bygott, District Girton, convincingly demonstrated multiple aspects of the preferred option that make it suboptimal for CAM. Proximity to houses, front doors, number of right-angled turns, portal positions, East-West Rail station position, etc., etc. The scoping document for CAM is due in 2021, as we understand. So again, it was thought to make sense to wait. Similarly with COVID, on page 57, section 1.13 of the papers, it is stated that there has been a short-term move away from public transport, but that the case for schemes such as C2C will be stronger as a result of COVID-19. Intense questioning of officers did not draw out convincing evidence for this statement, and it is contradicted by the employer's travel to work appendix in the pack. Indeed, the project manager admitted, nobody knows quite what the level of traffic level will be in a post-COVID world. What is certain is uncertainty. So again, it was thought to make sense to wait for more clarity to emerge before this big investment is made. So resolution 1 was carried unanimously and is a restatement of the June resolution, really with minor tweaks. So the LLF opposes a premature decision on the current Campbell to Cambridge busway scheme. It is unfit for purpose, anachronistic and environmentally damaging, and is now out of step with emerging proposals for East-West Rail and CAM. The LLF recommends a pause until the Mayor's CAM consultation is concluded and his proposed route, suitable for autonomous vehicles, MRT and adaptable into a metro, is published.
2, the location of the new East-West Rail station in Campbell is confirmed and the business case for the busway reworked in light of its impact. This is a multi-billion-pound scheme that needs to be thoroughly understood first. In the meantime, we support the combined authority's interim high-quality bus priority measures and/or improved services on existing infrastructure that can support the local plan and provide immediate transport benefits to key employment locations while the bigger picture falls into place. On the latter issue, Shrabona Bhattacharya, District Campbell, expressed great frustration in the underutilisation of existing resources and that better bus routes using the existing roads could have given the current generation a fast, reliable and affordable public transport service 5 years ago. Indeed, it's worth noting that an optimised on-road solution end-to-end has never been developed as part of the scheme. There was some bewilderment about the statement on page 56, section 1.9, that the combined authority has no mandate to progress further with its proposals for an alternative alignment for CAM, and that no routes were presented for comment. The LLF have asked for alternative routes to be developed, so welcome the Mayor's initiative. But it was disappointing that an alignment via the Girton interchange was not included. As we've said before, it has potential to deliver significant improvements to the modal shift, passenger numbers and connectivity over the preferred option and would use an existing transport corridor, thus avoiding the most contentious impacts of the preferred option. James Littlewood, Chief Executive, Cambridge PPF, questioned officers further on the potential benefits of a park and ride at Girton, and it was conceded that there were indeed benefits, quote, but that it was a different exam question. However, the LLF has long argued, in fact, since the public consultation in November 2017, that integration at Girton would greatly improve the business case for C2C, and more so since it was integrated into CAM in November 2018. Anyway, moving on to new developments, there was some confusion about the timing of the environmental impact assessment. Peter stated that public consultation on the scheme would not begin until after the independent audit has reported. This implied the officers were proposing to conduct the actual EIA itself in parallel. As Josh Matthews, City Councillor Newnham, pointed out, this looks like predetermination and potentially an unacceptable waste of public money were the independent audit to find the preferred option suboptimal. And the LLF unanimously agreed and carried resolution 2 unanimously. 1, the LLF asked for input into shaping the EIA scoping exercise. 2, the EIA should not start until after the independent audit concludes. And 3, the EIA should include a cultural heritage review of the entire landscape around the American Cemetery. The one piece of work the LLF does request immediately, though, are accurate plans and elevations for the Hardwick stretch. As Grenville Chamberlain, District Hardwick, pointed out, people living along St Neots Road have been left in a living purgatory, facing an appalling prospect of 8 lanes of continuous traffic, yet knowing the plans are incorrect and no elevations exist. This is the latest in a long saga of misleading plans, maps, statements and omissions that have dogged this project from start to finish, and it explains the lack of public trust in the process. So regarding the proposed independent audit, the LLF welcomes it, but with caution. The long history of C2C tells us that previous independent reports have been anything but. The controversial but pivotal Arup report of November 2018 turned out to be simply a validation of GCP work to date, and GCP senior management was shown by FOI to have heavily influenced the final report. Then there were the Mock McDonald technical notes on quick wins and a northern alignment via the Girton interchange of May 2019. And regarding the latter, despite legitimately being able to claim extensive interaction with the LLF technical group, the final report was written without a busway drawn in and no analysis of the potential benefits, wider, economic or otherwise. As I said on Tuesday, this, I felt, as chair of the committee, was a disingenuous piece of work. For its conclusions to be trusted, the board must demonstrate unequivocally that this audit will be independent, meaningful and credible. To this end, resolution 3 was proposed by Steve Jones, convener of the 21 parish councils west of Cambridge, and carried unanimously. The LLF would welcome the decision of the GCP board to appoint an independent auditor. This is the opportunity for the board to build the trust of the local community in C2C process. For trust to be built in this way, the audit must demonstratively be independent, transparent, and not controlled by GCP officers. For this to be achieved, in our view, the independent auditor should be appointed unanimously by the voting and non-voting members of the GCP board and agreed by the MPs for South Cambridgeshire and Cambridge. The audit should be managed by a steering committee, which is made up of people appointed by GCP and includes the LLF. The auditor should report to the steering committee, which will have oversight over the audit process and undertake regular reviews of progress and commenting on reports and other outputs by the auditor. And the audit should not be restricted to a narrow assessment of whether due process was followed, but would look at wider issues of how decisions were made. Finally, we ran out of time on Tuesday, and at the request of Campbell members, the LLF requests a further meeting in January to discuss the integration of C2C with other major infrastructure schemes, particularly at Campbell, progress on the independent audit, and the scoping of any forthcoming EIA. Thank you.
Helen, thank you for that. Thank you. I'd now like to invite South Cambridgeshire Councillor, District Councillor Gavin Clayton to speak. Gavin, are you there?
Chair, can I just interrupt on a point of process? We don't appear to have Councillor Clayton in the attendee room, although we have got somebody with a strange email address that we haven't identified. We've contacted that person, Gavin Clayton, to confirm whether that is indeed him, but we don't want to admit that person because we don't know who it is. Can I suggest we move to public questions, and then once we've heard from Councillor Clayton, hopefully we can take him after that.
Certainly, Wilma, we've got a bit of time with the public questions. Thank you for that. Okay, so may I invite an officer to read out the public questions received from the following: Mal Schofield, James Littlewood ×2, Dr. Marilyn Treacy, Terry Spencer, Karen Posgate, Jane Renwick, Pauline Jocelyn, and Alistair Burford.
Right, Chair, the first question is from Mal Schofield. Paragraph 1.12 states, the scheme has been developed in accordance with the DfT's Transport Analysis Guide, TAG. TAG, page 9 states in paragraph 1.8, the uncertainty around future travel behaviour and needs brought about by the coronavirus disease pandemic, amongst other sources of deep uncertainty, also provide a significant challenge to assessing which investment options may suit those needs and provide the best returns for the taxpayer. There is a need to consider how best to accommodate this uncertainty in appraisal and provide consistency across the local, regional, and national portfolios. This highlights the need and importance of collecting evaluation evidence to better inform these considerations over time. Question: bus patronage in England was on the decline before the first COVID outbreak in the UK. The number of local bus passenger journeys in England fell by 238 million, or 5.5%, to 4.07 billion in the year ending March 2020. Source: DfT Annual Bus Statistics. A meaningful update on travel behaviour will be available with the publication of the UK 2021 census. Would the board please consider deferring further expenditure on this contentious project until the insightful 2021 consensus information is available? The next question comes from James Littlewood, Chief Executive of Cambridge Past, Present and Future. Cambridge Past, Present and Future has been pressing for an independent review of this scheme for some time, and we would encourage the board to support this. In order to try and restore some trust, it is essential that the community and stakeholders have confidence that the review is genuinely independent. To achieve this will mean ensuring the brief for the work and the process for appointing the independent reviewer is transparent. Please can the board provide reassurance on this and some detail on the process? We have a second question from Mr. Littlewood. Mark Carney is delivering the Wreath Lectures on the BBC4 Radio 4 this winter and considering how we get what we value. Carney argues that society has come to embody Oscar Wilde's old aphorism, knowing the price of everything but the value of nothing. We see this in the report discussing the northern option for this scheme, page 56, paragraph 1.18, which is dismissed on the basis that it will be more expensive and performs less favourably. No consideration is given as to whether such a scheme might better protect the landscape that is valued by the community. Please can the GCP ensure that decisions are made that take into account the value we place on our landscape and environment? The next question is from Dr. Marilyn Treacy. To date, consultants the GCP have used on this project have been interwoven in its DNA and far from independent. Please can you provide evidence that an independent audit will indeed be independent? Will the LLF be able to review and input into the selection of consultants, terms of reference, and input information to be reviewed? The next question comes from Terry Spencer. Until the COVID-19 pandemic, the A1303 Madingley Hill was often heavily congested with inbound traffic at junction 13 of the M11, especially at morning peak times. If congestion does revert to the pre-lockdown levels, then one obvious long-term solution would be to provide an always junction at the Girton interchange to connect the A428 directly to the M11 in both directions, so as to reduce traffic along the A1303 and bypass junction 13. An upgrade of the Girton interchange, where the A14, M11 and A428 converge, has been suggested many times in the last few years. It would be the perfect location for a park and ride facility serving traffic from the northwest and north of Cambridge, and a coach station and a CAM station. It would encourage modal shift away from cars onto public transport with potentially huge economic benefits. An always junction will also be required if the proposed Oxford to Cambridge Expressway is built. The GCP has not lobbied actively for an always junction at Girton, which would solve the congestion problem at junction 13. This was suggested in an open letter to the GCP sent in January 2020 from a group of 12 prominent local politicians, including Anthony Brown MP. My questions are, why hasn't the GCP looked seriously at a northern route for the Campbell to Cambridge busway via the Girton interchange as a way of solving the problem of congestion at junction 13? And what actions is the GCP taking or planning to take to persuade the government to upgrade the Girton interchange as suggested? The next question is from Carolyn Postgate. Agenda item 8, paras 1.1 to 1.3 are all inaccurate based on 2015 data when it was predicted peak traffic would stretch the length of Madingley Road onto the A428 dual carriageway. Current conditions are that Madingley Road is running freely with no delays due to different working patterns during the COVID crisis. No one is able to predict future travel patterns or if confidence in public transport will ever return, and basing assumptions on 2015 data is not acceptable. Cambridgeshire Research Group's report on agenda pages 135, albeit with a small sample of employers, suggests that in 3 to 5 years' time, working from home will increase, question 14. Travel in rush hour will reduce, question 10, and changes in mode of travel show increase in cycling or not much change. Therefore, no modal shift to public transport, question 17. Furthermore, the National Travel Attitudes Study, Wave 4, page 5, footnote on agenda page 104 states, the lack of confidence in the use of public transport looks likely to remain after travel restrictions and social distancing measures have been removed. In addition, agenda item 9, para 4.16, page 104 states, With government deferring big spending and policy decisions until next year, the regulatory, operational and funding environment for public transport remains very uncertain. Therefore, I ask, what evidence is there to support the statements schemes such as What evidence is there to support the statement schemes such as C2C will be stronger as a result of COVID-19? Reference Agenda Item 8, paragraph 1.13. Should the scheme not be halted until the Cambridge University Centre for Business Research GCP Quarterly Progress Report findings are published in February and June 2021, reference Agenda Item 7, para 15.3, if the existing dire economic situation and new work patterns continue, what effect will it have upon the already unacceptably low BCR of 0.43, reference Agenda Item 8, para 10.6. The next question is from Jane Renwick. It is hard to understand how, after all this time, we are now left with only one C2C route option on the table. We are told that to reconsider an alternative route at this stage would be a deviation from the prescribed process. Is this the process that has failed to take seriously or follow up on any alternative routes suggested in numerous consultations, local meetings, local forums, focus groups, residents groups, and environmental groups? The summary dismissal of other ideas has suggested an idea of predetermination concerning the whole matter. We are now left with one route, the preferred route, reached apparently through this prescribed process. Are the GCP, by arranging for an independent audit of their preferred route, just following another step along the prescribed process to reach their predetermined goal? The next question is from Pauline Jocelyn. When planning the route of the C2C busway autonomous metro, it is obvious that the GCP have not taken into account the concerns voiced by as many as 900 Hardwick residents who were opposed to the removal of the 2 miles of trees and vegetation on St Neots Road and replace them with tarmac. This visual barrier of approximately 3,000 trees along St Neots Road absorbs between 500 and 3,000 tonnes of CO2, and its removal would double the pollution in our village. Is the GCP listening to the residents of Hardwick? The next question comes from Alistair Burford. 2 years ago, the board pack contained an interim report prepared by Mott MacDonald entitled Campbell to Cambridge Better Public Transport Project, November 2018. Which detailed environmental constraints within the proposed route from Madingley Marsh to the Rifle Range, Phase 1. This report was subsequent to the options appraisal report referred to in today's board papers, page 60, clause 4.8. On page 41 of the November 2018 report, 3 significant constraints are highlighted. 1, buried archaeology at the waterworks site. 2, the wooded area on St Neots Road in front of the waterworks is a tree preservation order block and bat roost potential. 3, an area extending from the waterworks to beyond Cromley is marked as brown hare activity. In 2018 to 2019, further ecology surveys were conducted and have confirmed bat activity at the waterworks site and a significant presence of brown hares between the waterworks and Cromley. Yet, despite the hundreds and thousands spent on the surveys to make informed decisions, the preferred route alignment still runs straight through the middle of each of these significant areas. Can the board explain why, given the constraints that have already been identified between the waterworks and Cromley, that the route has not been revised to avoid these significant constraints so that we have a more accurate version of the proposed route? 2, before any further surveys are commissioned, should the board not ensure that the surveys that have already been conducted have been actioned? And 3, if the board is minded to approve the request for the EIA survey, will they also instruct the officers to make any necessary amendments to the route before returning the scheme to the board? And does the board undertake to fully consult on any new proposed route alignment? And that concludes the questions, Chair.
Wilma, well done, I must say. So I understand we've made contact with Councillor Gavin Clayton as well. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask officers to respond to these questions. Then I'll bring Councillor Clayton into the room. So could I invite Peter Blake, the Transport Director, and Rachel Stope, our Chief Executive, to respond to these questions? Peter, will you respond to the non-audit questions first? And then Rachel, will you respond to the questions from James Littlewood and Marilyn Treacy on the audit? Peter.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of the question from Mal Schofield, the Campbell and Cambridge project has been developed over a number of years. Whilst the longer term impacts of COVID are uncertain, we, and indeed I'm sure most scheme promoters across the country, will continue to monitor the situation, draw and evaluate on the emerging data. We'll continue to develop the scheme in accordance with the DFT requirements, and we'll adhere to the revised business case guidance from the department that we expect to be produced early next year as a result of the pandemic. However, there remains an urgent need to progress planning to provide better, reliable public transport, cycling and walking connections for new and growing communities and housing developments that are being built across the Greater Cambridge area. In terms of the question from James Littlewood, the most significant and sensitive environmental constraints on the corridor lie to the north of the A428. So Madingley Hall and its grounds, the American Cemetery, Madingley Wood SSI. GCP ensures that decisions taking into account environmental issues at each and every stage. The proposed alignment avoids these nationally recognised sites, and the approach has been in accordance with the Department for Transport requirements. Extensive information, including extensive environmental information, is published on the website. The question from Terry Spencer, just to reiterate, as part of a full and transparent appraisal process that is compliant with DFT guidance, we have readily and regularly considered, documented and published deliberations of alternative routes, including northern alignments, on-road alignments and proposals for stakeholders, and they are all published online. The GCP has actively lobbied Highways England for improvements to the Girton interchange, and an open letter was issued and published way back in October 2017. However, for the foreseeable future, no further works to the Girton interchange are planned by Highways England. Nevertheless, a route and a park and ride at Girton doesn't best meet the objectives of the Campbell to Cambridge scheme to support developments along the corridor that are primarily south of the A428. It would be longer, it would be more expensive. And obviously, it would not be accessible from the 428 west without major changes at Girton. And as I said earlier on, that Highways England have no plans to do that. And again, all of that information is available on our website. Turning to the question from Carolyn Postgate, in the context where confidence in public transport has been undermined as a result of the pandemic, and people are returning to cars more quickly than any other mode, the need to provide quality, reliable public transport options to encourage people out of private vehicles is stronger. The challenges remain around congestion, air quality and carbon, and we need to be tackling them. And in Greater Cambridge, people are returning to cars more quickly than any other mode, and we are seeing morning and afternoon travel peaks returning. We, as I've said previously, will continue to monitor the impacts of COVID, and we'll draw on the data, but we'll do that in accordance with requirements from the Department for Transport. The benefit cost ratio relates to transport related benefits, but the total return on the investment, including the wider economic benefits, is far, far higher. And that includes the links to unlock development potential within the area. And I think it's actually notable that there are planned changes to the Treasury Green Book evaluation that give far more prominence to the wider economic case rather than the simple benefit cost ratio. And we expect to see that in the very near future. In terms of the question from Jane Renwick, the independent audit is in addition to the prescribed process to provide further robustness in decision making. As part of a full and transparent appraisal process, and I'm going to say it again, that is compliant with Department for Transport guidance, we have readily and regularly reviewed, considered, documented alternative approaches and alternative alignments, and all that information is available online. From the question from Pauline Joslin, yes, we are listening to residents of Hardwick. A commitment was given to a noise barrier on the A428, which is currently in a state of disrepair, and that's just one example of how we're doing that. Officers have regularly attended both parish council meetings and events in the area, and if the board considers that we take the next steps around the environmental impact assessment, then that engagement will happen again in terms of the detailed designs that many of our stakeholders are asking to see. Turning to Alistair Burford's question, the options appraisal process considers environmental constraints and highlighted areas of potential impacts. The environmental issues raised are typical of those found in similar locations right across the area, and the decision not to locate the travel hub at the waterworks site minimises potential impacts on buried archaeology and the tree preservation order belt. Potential impacts on bat roosts will continue to be assessed as part of the environmental impact assessment, as indeed will brown hares, albeit they are widespread across East Anglia and not unique to this area. The scale and impact of opportunities to mitigate would be fully assessed and would be consulted upon as part of an environmental impact assessment process if we move to that stage. The decision on the preferred route is based on a multi-criteria analysis. It's not just environmental factors, it's not just social factors, it's not just economic factors. The Department for Transport requires us to assess all of those in terms of our decision making as part of the business case process. Outstanding actions from surveys, there are none from the existing surveys that have been undertaken to date, other than we continue to analyse and undertake further surveys of the area. And additional surveys for archaeology and ecology will be required as we progress to the next stage, and they will be made publicly available as previously. And finally, in terms of Alistair's point, GCP officers are seeking from the executive board to recommence the technical work, which will include surveys, and public consultation would be required as part of the EIA process. I'll then hand over to Rachel.
Thank you, Peter. Rachel, yes, can you pick up the audit questions from James Littlewood and Marilyn Treacy?
Yep, thank you, Chair. So in response to both of those questions, as well as comments from the Chair of the LLF, if the board does agree today to commission an audit review, then I'm absolutely happy to commit to ensuring it's genuinely independent and that the way in which the process is managed and reported is also independent and transparent. To facilitate this, I would envisage appointing an independent party to develop and agree terms of reference for the review, to commission an independent transport expert and to supervise their work, to work with that transport expert to define the assumptions and constraints that would be the focus of the review, to invite representative groups to submit further written comments, to ensure that the findings of the review are presented to and discussed with the GCP board in a fair and transparent way, and to ensure that there are clear communications throughout the process with board members and representative groups. Subject to board agreement, the terms of reference, including the proposed timetable and work programme, will then be published, circulated to interested parties and made available on our website. Communication throughout the process will follow the same open and transparent process and will be overseen by that independent party. Thank you, Chair.
Rachel, thank you for that. And thank you, Peter, as well, for those responses. So can I go back and invite Councillor Clayton to the meeting, please? Have we got him?
Yes.
Thank you, Roger.
Hi, Gavin. How are you doing?
Hello, I'm doing all right.
Good. Please, off you go.
Okay, thank you. So firstly, I just wanted to respond to one thing that was said by the LLF chair. I am an elected representative who wasn't invited to the LLF meeting, so it would be great if she could make sure that I'm invited to future ones. That would be really helpful.
I'm sure she's heard that, Gavin.
Thank you. So there are now. It's really good that I came after those questions, actually, the more technical questions, because what I'm hoping to do is represent the 12,000 residents of Camborne, 12,000 current population of Camborne. And as somebody who's lived in Campbell for 20 years and has seen the road usage go from the old road, as we refer to it, to the new A428, to the current situation prior to lockdown, where journey times were very long and stressful for people in all walks of life. And I'll aim to represent that this afternoon through the views of local leaders, but also the needs of the local population. To that end, I'll read brief statements from Camborne Village College and Camborne Town Council, who are supportive of the speedy restart and delivery of the C2C off-road option linking Camborne to Cambridge. But also in my mind are families that over the coming years will occupy the 3,500 houses to be built in Bourne Airfield and the circa 2,500 homes in West Camborne too. So firstly, from Village College, from the Deputy Principal of Camborne Village College, who is also the staff member responsible for managing the transition to post-16 education. And she wrote the following: inadequate public transport presents a distinct barrier for school leavers, making important decisions about where to go and what to do next. For those students who do not have access to a car and/or a lift or the financial support to utilise taxis, it is the lack of transport links between Camborne and Cambridge that leads in shaping the decisions that they make regarding their post-16 education. As a school, we feel that whilst transport should be a consideration as part of the post-16 transition, it should not be a leading consideration and should definitely not be a barrier. At present, many pupils have to travel over 3 hours per day. This clearly impacts on their studies, mental and social well-being. Many of our students will benefit from better public transport links, increasing their educational opportunities, helping sustain attendance, and ultimately supporting success at post-16 institutions. We support the proposal put forward by Greater Cambridge Partnership, Camborne to Cambridge Better Public Transport Project, and hope you will too. Personally, I'd like to add, as a parent of a former Hills Road student myself, travel journey time was an issue that required constant management, and any parents of teenagers will understand that. Constant management in order to maintain our own son's attendance and help him realise his potential and academic attainment. We were fortunate to be able to afford to use private car travel when needed to mitigate those very early starts and long college days. Not everyone is as fortunate, and Camborne currently has over 300 children on free school meals, and their opportunities must not be impacted by that. At a time where we are publicly acknowledging the negative impacts on long-term life chances of interruptions to learning caused by COVID, those of us involved in this decision today really need to act with the future prospects of Camborne's children uppermost in our minds. We should not limit their life chances due to inadequate public transport, poor air quality and economic disadvantage. And secondly, the representation of the Town Council's position. Camborne residents urgently need a fast, reliable and affordable public transport service to Cambridge, and we urge members of the GCP Executive Board to support the current proposal. We are aware of and have sympathy for the concerns raised by the communities affected along the route and of the arguments put forward for an on-road solution. However, we have not seen any convincing evidence that an on-road solution is possible that would meet our key priorities of speed and reliability. Camborne Town Council therefore supports the proposed off-road solution, and while we have never favoured any specific route, we consider the option chosen to be suitable, subject to detailed mitigation in design. We therefore support the current proposal and request that it is approved for further detailed design with a focus on mitigating impacts along the route. We also request that discussions are progressed as soon as possible regarding proposals for a travel hub in Camborne. Camborne Town Council requests that the GCP Executive Board work with East West Rail and local bus operators on an integrated transport hub at Camborne, sited to the north of the A428. This would promote sustainable and multimodal transport links from Camborne, West Camborne, Bourne Airfield and surrounding villages. And if I may just add very briefly at the end, the alternative is that the reductions in congestion that people have referred to today that we've seen during COVID will soon evaporate, along with any additional benefits from the additional buses that have, the on-road bus services that have been introduced recently. And that's regardless of any longer term behavioural change in working patterns, and quite simply due to the levels of development planned over the coming decade in Bourne Airfield, West Camborne, and who knows, to the north of the A428 too in the future. The congestion will return to Madingley Hill. Journey times will once again increase, along with the poor air quality and the impacts on quality of life for many thousands of residents. Therefore, I urge you to approve the restarting of this project, including the audit process at the earliest opportunity. Thank you.
Gavin, thank you very much for that. And thank you for your patience while we made sure you were who you were.
Thank you. That's okay. Thank you.
Okay. I'd now like to go to the chair of the Assembly. Actually, there's a bit of chair's discretion because I'm going to go to a previous chair of the Assembly as well. So first of all, Tim Bick, and then I will ask Tim Wotherspoon to join us. Tim, you'd like to comment on this?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, for many of the same reasons that Councillor Clayton identified just now, the Assembly has historically supported this scheme. And though it's important to recognise, and I want to straight away, that there have been a number of our members who have not been. We have received many representations from members of the public, and I think we are very aware of their points of view about this scheme. After the proposition of an alternative route didn't appear to have come to anything, at our recent meeting, we agreed to request the Executive Board to determine the next steps on this project. And it was important that that request was supported by both those who support this scheme and those who continue to have reservations about it, and some serious outstanding points that they want to see addressed. So, Chair, the Assembly will be pleased to see that in response to that request, you have put the matter on your agenda today and are planning to determine next steps with this project. Members of the Assembly, I think, will also be pleased that this involves a process to independently validate the previous stages of option selection to date, and to concurrently conduct the environmental impact assessment, which seems to many of us really important as a step that we must get into, bearing in mind the nature of many of the objections and reservations that people in the public are asking us to look at. And so I think the Assembly will be satisfied by what is recommended for you to support today, and look forward to your debate on that.
Thanks, Tim. And can I just add that board members were very aware of the message sent from the Assembly to try and find a way forward on this. So thank you for that, Tim Bick. Can I go to Tim Wotherspoon now? Tim Wotherspoon, welcome. And I'm using my discretion here because you were previous chair when this first came to the Assembly. So I would value your comments as well.
Yes, Chairman, thank you very much for resurrecting me from the grave for this occasion. We had an extensive discussion to which I seem to recall all 15 members contributed in the afternoon of our all-day meeting on the 30th of January. The minutes in my report to your 19th of February meeting run to 6 pages, and that gives you some indication of the extent of scrutiny to which the Joint Assembly has subjected C2C at that and other meetings. C2C had been on your 19th of February agenda, but you were not able to take it forward at that time. Indeed, at that time, many members feared a potential clash between cyclists going along Adams Road between the West Cambridge site and the city centre, about which we had been presented with a 3,000 signature petition. And this, I think, is an example where the scheme has been amended over the years in light of concerns that have been raised. Another change in response to community consultation was shifting the location of the travel hub from the waterworks at Madingley Mulch to Scotland Farm. Members also wanted to give voice to the benefits of C2C to Camborne residents, and I'm delighted we've just heard from Councillor Gavin Clayton about the desire in Camborne for C2C to proceed. The notion that the majority of passengers out of Camborne would prefer to take a direct East-West Rail train to Cambridge South Station overlooks two of the key drivers of the scheme, namely to offer people moving into the 3,500 houses at Bourne Airfield an attractive public transport alternative to the car, and second, to serve the 14,000 jobs coming in the expansion of the University West Cambridge site, its principal physical sciences campus, including the world-famous Cavendish Laboratory. Residents of Hardwick and Coton may even welcome the possibility of rapid transit stops within walking distance of their home, and C2C will be able to offer a much more frequent service than East-West Rail, with a variety of destinations in and around the city. In the run-up to the 30th of January meeting, and over the past 3 weeks, many people have written to me. I'm a firm believer in public participation, and I'd like to thank everyone for going to the trouble of contacting me. I've had 44 letters this time, including 2 from the end of Cambridge Road, Coton, and 9 from St Neots Road, Hardwick. There have been many common themes, but I have to say also a lot of misconceptions, which suggest a strong need for more effective communication of the benefits and greater reassurance that the quality of life, which residents value highly about the villages they live in, will not be destroyed. People in Hardwick are genuinely concerned about the environmental impact, especially the consequences for noise, air quality, and disturbance of wildlife of cutting down trees between St Neots Road and the A428. And the Coton perspective is particularly exercised by piercing the green belt and raising the possibility of development on the West Field. To conclude, while of course some members had grave concerns, the majority of members were generally supportive of proceeding from the outline business case to the full business case stage, appreciating that the precise alignment is to be informed by detailed design work and environmental impact assessment. I can't help observing that the world has come up with a vaccine for COVID-19 faster than we have been able to progress from the Joint Assembly discussion on the 30th of January to the Executive Board decision I hope you're about to take. It usually follows 3 weeks later. City deal funding was devolved so that Greater Cambridge could address its infrastructure priorities at a local level. The fact that we have been seen to be incapable of doing so has to be acknowledged as a failure of governance. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Thank you for that. Okay, so now I would like to go on and invite Peter Blake to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. If I can just introduce my colleague, Joe Baker, who in a moment I'm just going to ask to talk through the scheme itself. But just to bring forward some of the background to this. I mean, as you've already heard, this scheme has been much debated. It was deferred from your June board to allow for discussions to continue. And we are now in a position for you to consider the next steps. Paragraph 2.0 outlines the recommendations, and there are 3 key thrusts to the recommendations. One is to note the business case. One is to agree the independent audit, which Rachel outlined earlier on. And one is to recommence work on the scheme and the preparatory work that's required for an environmental impact assessment. Paragraph 4.2 outlines the stage in the process that we're at. This is not the final decision. This is a decision to move to the next step, which, if we get there, will involve an environmental impact assessment. That will, the cornerstone of that is consultation with the public in terms of the detailed design and the detail issues that a number of the speakers have spoken about. So getting to that point feels like we could start to answer many of their questions. As I've said previously, so I am going to say it again, we have followed the Department for Transport's prescribed process. So we've produced a strategic business case and then an outline business case. All of that documentation is available on the website. We follow the Treasury Green Book requirements around economic assessment, financial assessment, strategic assessment, and the like. We've gone through the business case process that balances all of those issues before coming to a conclusion. There is a compelling strategic case for this scheme. It sits clearly within the arc, Oxford to Cambridge, links with the absolutely falls out of the SPEAR work that the combined authority were leading on, local planning and transport documents, and then drilling down to the planning developments at Bourne, West Cambourne and West Cambridge. But Cambourne to Cambridge is part of a wider network. Paragraph 6.7 outlines the GCP's programme of network, but of course, working with combined authority colleagues on the development of the CAM network, and then integration with East West Rail colleagues and their proposals bringing that forward, which we'll hear more about early next year. The technical work is clear, and actually Councillor Clayton summarised it far better than some of our technical assessments have done. It's a heavily congested environment. There's high levels of car mode share and limited public transport options. Reliability is a key determining factor. And developments such as Bourne and West Cambourne are fully dependent upon a public transport scheme. Pardon me. Developing the business case has explored alternatives, north, south, online, offline, as we are required to do. We've had 3 formal consultations, and engagement has been undertaken pretty much throughout the 5 years of developing this project. And we have used the prescribed optioneering process to get to our preferred option. And Joe will now bring the preferred option to life.
Thank you, Peter. Just to run through the preferred option, it's effectively a refinement of the phase 1 option, which was previously presented to you, I think, in December 2018. Since then, and having done consultation on phase 2, we've added to that an offline solution for phase 2. And as was noted earlier, the decision to recommend a park and ride site at Scotland Farm, which also reflected the outcome of the 2018-2019 consultation. There have been some amendments to phase 1, and as I go through the details of the scheme, I will refer to those, but those pick up various bits of stakeholder input that we've encountered along the way. As has been touched on already in terms of the case of the scheme, the basic benefit cost ratio, as has been noted, is relatively low, but there is a very strong level of wider economic impacts, which lead to a strong return in terms of the local benefits. And again, has been noted, the recent revision of the Green Book for 2020 indicates that guidance in the future is likely to advise that we should be less concerned about the precise value of the BCR, where there is a strong strategic case, as there is in this instance. And we await both the update of transport analysis guidance for 2021, which will reflect things like the Office of Budget Responsibility's GDP forecasts, but also the guidance for project business cases that supports the Green Book. And in due course, we will need to revisit the scheme economics to reflect those changes of guidance as they go along. And that is in line with, as Peter says, the standard process that as you proceed to different stages in the study, you revisit the economics, you refine your forecasts, and we will be doing that. There is some additional data in the report. I won't go through all the numbers in view of the time around improved journey times and improved reliability. And there's also a summary in the report of the environmental impacts, commenting that overall they are from minor to moderate adverse and mostly mitigatable. And I will come back to some of the issues around St Neots Road in Hardwick, where maybe the issues are more challenging. There is, in support of the report, the full outline business case, and behind that, a whole series of annexes that support the 5 cases of the business case. So fairly extensive documentation online, which includes quite significant amount of environmental assessment already. That's been underpinned by ecological surveys, archaeological surveys, and a range of other pieces of work. That said, more work does need to be done. And if a decision is taken to proceed with an EIA, then significant further surveys will be undertaken to provide more information on the impacts of the scheme. I won't go into too much detail on section 11, which deals with bus routes, but just as a reminder, we have developed a sort of proposed bus network. It is indicative at the moment, and to be very clear, there are no buses proposed to terminate at Grange Road. Buses will proceed into the city centre, down as the universal service does past the station to the CBC, and a range of destinations will be served by the proposed routes. But of course, those will in due course be worked up in agreement with operators or potentially through a future mayoral franchise. So if you'll let me talk through the scheme itself, I'll just try and pick up some of the key features of the scheme. It's important, as has already been referred to, subject to further amendment depending on what comes out of the EIA and mitigation measures that are identified through that process. So starting at Camborne, the current plan is a low intervention route that serves the city centre. Once there is clarity with regard to the location of an east-west rail station, and also clarity in terms of the future alignment of the CAM onto St Neots, then we're absolutely committed to work with East West Rail, the Combined Authority and the Town Council to develop ideas around a travel hub to ensure the type of connectivity that Councillor Betson and others have recommended, and we are entirely in agreement with that. We're not in a position to design anything or model its impacts because of the uncertainty about the location of the station, which could be to the north, which is clearly the local preference, but also potentially to the south of Camborne. And similarly, we have no idea about service frequency, the scale of the station East West Rail recommend, or anything along those lines. So we are highly supportive of the principle of working up a travel hub as soon as we're able to, and that's the sort of refinement, the design we'd see coming in when it can be put into place. Moving through Bourne Airfield, again, it's just worth noting that I'm sure members will be aware 500 houses may proceed now, but for the full development can't proceed until CTC is resolved. So there's clear urgency to confirm the status of the scheme. In terms of Scotland Farm, there was been strong preference for that, and that's reflected in the decision. It's quite a fine balance between that and the waterworks site in many other regards. Strong concerns have been expressed by the parish council at Dry Drayton, and in response to that, we will ensure an access route to Dry Drayton for cyclists and pedestrians. And we also note their concerns about the potential for rat running, and that will be picked up in the transport assessment, and we'll consider whether any additional intervention is required in that regard to meet their concerns, as well as the sort of landscaping and shielding that you'd expect associated with the site. Moving on to Hardwick, and I think we totally recognise that's the main area of concern. The off-route alignment has been adopted because it gives the highest level of benefit. Overall, I think for many respondents to our consultation, it's popular. We entirely understand that it is a concern to local residents on St Neots Road, but it's also worth noting that the off-route alignment helps us to ensure CAM compliance by providing the segregation that's called for in the LTP sub-strategy for CAM. All in all, there are around 50 properties in St Neots Road facing the scheme. The loss of scrub and trees and the construction of CTC will have an adverse impact, probably for around 35 properties. And again, the purpose of doing the EIA is to actually quantify which properties will experience those issues. The impact on noise and air quality, although it's been discussed quite a lot, is actually likely to be significantly less. Trees don't have a huge impact. They have some benefits in terms of noise and air quality. The visual is going to be by far the biggest impact. And as already been referred to, there is potential for an improved noise barrier to be put in place. There's sections of the A428 which are elevated, have poor noise barriers at the moment. And those who are not familiar with the area may be useful to note that actually the problem is very much about existing traffic noise, and an improved barrier may be able to actually reduce net noise. Vegetation would be lost along mainly at the point where the spacing between the A428 and St Neots Road is narrowest. That's a distance of about a mile, where there are about 160 semi-mature or mature trees, as well as newer saplings growing. In all, we estimate there's actually about 15 mature trees. Most of the others have been planted relatively recently, but clearly there is a concern about any loss of vegetation, and there is a commitment from GCP to ensure overall biodiversity net gain as a result of the scheme. So where we are losing trees or other vegetation, those would be replaced, obviously not necessarily in the same location. And that helps address some concerns that's been raised about, for example, overall carbon impacts. Moving on to Coton, again, in terms of the impact of the scheme, we think it's unlikely to be significant or perceptible in terms of noise or air quality, assuming the operation of a modest number of electric vehicles at a distance of at least 40 to 45 metres from the nearest property. That sort of detail will obviously be quantified in the EIA. I can give an opinion at the moment. The EIA will actually provide much more detailed analysis of that. There will be visual impact, particularly at the closest properties on Cambridge Road, and a need for screening of the visual impact from those properties. Generally, in the rest of Coton, and particularly thinking about, say, the conservation area around the village, those properties are further away, and it's unlikely that there'll be any visual impact, although clearly we will be doing a thorough review of anyone who might be impacted. There are also some potential issues to resolve in terms of farm accesses and things like that. But importantly, we were, prior to the scheme being put on pause, working with CPPF, National Trust and other stakeholders through a working group on landscape, heritage and the environment, and trying to finalise the alignment, and again, to refine the alignment to minimise the overall impact on the landscape. And the intention would be, if work restarts as we head into the IA phases, to reinvigorate that work and seek to continue to finesse the alignment. There is also, as has been alluded to, the opportunity for a stop to be provided, so there is overall benefit to local residents who do actually wish to benefit from rapid public transport to the various destinations served by the scheme. If we move on over the M11 into West Cambridge, and again, since the route was last presented to the Executive Board, it has been amended with a diversion onto Charles Babbage Road. That reflects representation from the university about the potential impacts on electron microscopes located to the south side of the West Cambridge site. What's happened in the meantime, as you know, is a submission of the planning application for the West Cambridge site that remains undetermined. The transport assessment refers to C2C, but I think there is some concern on our part to provide the university with some certainty around what is proposed for C2C to ensure that a corridor along Charles Babbage Road is safeguarded, not only to enable C2C to proceed, but also to ensure it's safeguarded for the future requirements of the CAM as well. And I think the delay in doing so potentially creates a degree of risk for both schemes. So again, it's another reason why it's important that we are able to reinvigorate some of those discussions. Moving on to the Westfields, again, following the direction of the previous Executive Board discussion on the scheme, we undertook further review of greenbelt impacts, and indeed that was a major reason why for a while we considered Adams Road as an alternative alignment. We have amended the alignment towards the corner of the field to minimise the impact on the green belt, although we clearly need to be mindful of maintaining operating abilities. And somewhere on the west field or in that vicinity, clearly there may be a need to work out where a CAM portal would be and think what the arrangements in the longer term would be there. Moving along to the crossing of the Binbrook, there will be a degree of elevation to ensure that the scheme does not contribute to flood risk and is not in turn vulnerable to being flooded across the floodplain. That would be a low bridge, but it would be above prevailing ground level. The approaches would be an earth embankment, which could be landscaped to try and minimise visual impacts from properties down to towards the south on streets such as Cranmer Road and Gough Way. And on the rifle range itself, again, there are some challenges to ensuring access on both sides of the rifle range, looking at the interests both of Clare Hall, the rugby club and schools who are using sports grounds in the area. So some issues still to be resolved with those stakeholders if discussions with them are now reinstated as part of the EIA process. And I think that's probably all I wanted to run through on this, but obviously I'm sure Peter and myself can take any details, questions on other aspects of the alignment. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe, and thank you, Peter, for that. I'm going to open it up to the board, but if I may start, which is with a question. So I very much welcome our consideration of the environmental impact assessment, because I think until we start actually spending money on something like that, people's concerns cannot actually be looked at properly. But I do also appreciate that until we get into the meat of the EIA, we are going to run an audit process. And I just would like clarity myself, and maybe it's from you, Rachel, because you spoke to the questions as well. There has been this concern about independence and trust, etc. And although you did go over it in your responses to the questions, maybe you'd just like to reiterate exactly the process so that we can be sure that it is a truly independent, robust audit. Because the last thing I want to do is to be sitting here in 6 months' time, as I'm sure everyone else, and still having the same comments being thrown about. So maybe you could come back on that, Rachel.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Happy to. I mean, obviously, we haven't started the process because you haven't yet made the decision to have an audit. If you do that today, then I would envisage that we would come back to you as early as next week with a detailed proposal about how the audit could work. What I was trying to say in my answer earlier is that I absolutely recognise the need to put an independent party between GCP officers and the process. So the intention that I would propose to the GCP board would be to appoint somebody, not necessarily a transport expert, but somebody that could facilitate that program that has the right sort of skills to oversee the process, including commissioning that independent expert and doing the liaison with yourselves and with representative groups in the community. So that's what we would envisage to ensure that it is a fully independent process. In addition to that, I would imagine that I would be suggesting to you that every stage of it is a very transparent process and that things are done in writing and published on the website at every stage of the process. So I would hope through discussion with yourselves next week, we'd be able to devise a process, appoint somebody to then take on that process and they would be responsible for developing the terms of reference and taking it from there on in consultation with yourselves.
Smashing. Thank you for that. Okay, I'll open up to the board. Please raise your blue hand should you wish to come in on this. Well, I've got no one at the moment, but I can't believe that. Oh, here we go. Okay, Neil, you're first.
I remembered to unmute again. Okay, so I will try and keep my my comments brief as possible. So, you know, thank you to the contributions which we've heard in this, and I think we have got a sort of range of views, and I think that was, you know, reflected in the challenge from the Joint Assembly, which was, I think, a fair one to the board, which is to say, you know, define where we're going, what the next steps are on this. I think the need for a solution to better serve Camborne and Bourne, as Councillor Clayton said, is not in question. But as was pointed out by several of the questions and by the chair of the LLF and indeed by the Joint Assembly, we need to balance in the next steps the recognition that this particular option has raised genuine issues of concern amongst the impacted villages. And one articulation of that concern that resonates with me is focused on the basis under which alternatives have previously been rejected, because the scheme is indeed the product of a series of assumptions and constraints which have been considered, some physical, some environmental, policy and economic, that have reduced the set of feasible options and alternatives. You know, that's basically the process which the GCP has gone through, and the key thing is those assumptions and constraints. And this corridor has more constraints and complexities than many, and there continues to be a lot of new developments and change. Therefore, it is not unreasonable, I think, given the passage of time, given the complexities of the issues, and given the issues that have been raised about the basis under which those alternatives were rejected at an earlier stage, that we undertake this audit review to test those constraints and assumptions. I'm fully supportive of that, and I hope the participants in this program will recognize the genuine attempt on the part in the recommendations to provide a process to provide that review. This must be a credible and thorough process. I agree with you entirely, Chair. You know, in 6 months' time, the focus of our discussion must be on the content contained in the independent parties report, not the discussion about the rights and wrongs of the process which was followed and the basis under the report was prepared. The CEO has made reference to an independent party commissioning the work of the independent expert. That is really important. And it's really important that people recognize that in order to be independent, this report has to be commissioned by an independent party and run by an independent party, as well as there being an independent expert actually doing it. It needs to be properly channeled and it needs to be transparent. And if that's done, I hope there will be widespread confidence in the process, because that confidence is important. And I really, really want to see us as a board making sure that that integrity of the process and the credibility of that process is there. I'm really well aware this is a further step in the process. It's more money, but this is absolutely the right time to ask these questions. And if the process is set up properly, it will be money very well spent. So I am very supportive of that part of the recommendation. Thank you.
Roger, did you call the next speaker because you're on mute?
Oh no, I've done it myself. Apologies, everyone. I did. I said Lewis, so apologies, Lewis. Off you go.
You said it very quietly, Roger. Yeah, I've listened carefully to the contributions and the questions, and I also listened into the local liaison forum. I have been involved in every stage of this project in terms of seeing the strength of the evidence, challenging officers, looking at the routes and the options, I don't think anybody could dispute, including those who oppose aspects of it or have opposed different stages at different stages, that we haven't been exhaustive. It's certainly been exhaustive, and I've got my views, and I think they're evidence-based. I think we've looked at the on-road. I didn't hear anything really about the on-road today. We've looked at the northern alignment. I haven't heard really anything today on a northern alignment. And within the option of a southern route, there's been a significant range of options looked at, different hubs looked at, different combinations. So I'm very happy for there to be an independent audit. I will look to make sure that it's independent, and I'm aware that it's got two stages. One, and that's the wording in this report, that we do have to get the process right. And of course, some people, including people who oppose much of what we've done and the process, will challenge that this is independent. But I am someone who will, both in terms of two stages, first, the shape of the audit, and second, ensuring that the person who does the review has got absolutely no ties to the GCP and can demonstrably state their expertise, links to the fact that this has to be a process and choice that meets the national rules set by the DFT, but evidences what has happened. There is plenty of evidence, and I would ask and ensure that the audit looks at all of the responses, including a range from residents of Coton about some of the different issues on roads, some of the different issues about environmental impacts, all of the evidence that's been provided. So it isn't just going to look at the GCP's view of life. And yeah, I support that independent audit. I also welcome the fact that there will be further opportunities for people in Coton and Hardwick and others with views as part of the follow-on stage. So people really do need to look at page 57 of our report, which has got the recommendations, and there won't essentially be a significant movement on the environmental impact assessment until the report to the board in June. So we do need to make progress ultimately. It has been several years. It isn't just about Bourne, as Councillor Clayton said. There is a need for public transport. And I am surprised sometimes, and these are just personal views, that aspects like the Girton interchange or subject to assessment, that East-West Rail will mean this isn't needed, are raised. The Girton interchange has been significantly looked at. I have met Highways England. I have lobbied, along with others, along with the GCP, along with MPs for the Girton interchange. And if it ain't in the programme for 5 or 10 years, then I do think that if people want to come up with a different option, they should look harder. The Girton interchange takes the route way off course. In other references, it is clear that the public will take public transport if it connects A to B. If it goes from A to B via C, then it isn't going to work. So I'm not going to apologise for challenging red herrings whilst at the same time supporting a completely independent process here. And I will look hard at the process. I'm sure the other members of the board will do. So I support the audit review. I will play my part in ensuring it's independent. And I support the progress subject to the response on that further on to the environmental impact assessment. But that's jumping ahead a stage. Let's just get this independent audit right. Thank you.
Thanks, Lewis. Just before I bring in Claire, just a couple of things from me. Personally, I know regarding the Girton interchange that Anthony Brown, MP for South Cambridgeshire, is keen for it to be looked at again. But obviously, as with anything like this, it will be many years in the future should anything happen. So I just thought I'd mention that. The other thing is there's something in the recommendations, and maybe I need to bring Rachel back in on this. Are we confident that the audit review will be completed by or in time for the June board, bearing in mind that we'd have to have assembly and board, etc.? I'm just asking the question because I have no idea how long these things might take.
Yes, Chair, our initial thinking on it, that we can make that timetable, and obviously, you know, that's based on the Assembly and members of the board keen to move forward at some pace now. So I think that the first quarter of next year does allow enough time to do it, but that's why we do probably need to talk with you about it if you make that decision today, next week, in order to make some rapid progress and get the appointments made. But subject to that appointment, that independent person will need to develop a detailed timetable, but we'll try and ask for that to be done within those time constraints.
Sure. Don't get me wrong, I'm very happy with a deadline because I think people work to deadlines. I just wanted to make sure it was an appropriate deadline, and I'm assuming that if we get everything in place, should we decide to go ahead with this as per recommendations, that should we need a revised timetable, we can discuss it in March. But I just wanted to ask that question, so thank you. Claire.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make three quite short points. The first one is the UK really needs Cambridge to be alive. It needs to not be a gridlocked place to avoid, where people can't afford to live in cycling distance of their jobs and their daily destinations and can't afford the time to get in and out of them. So that's really important, especially if we're on our own after Brexit, which is quite top of mind at the moment and after COVID. These things don't happen by magic, nor by waiting for EWR to enable 1 million new homes. We have got to do something in the short term as well as in the long term. We want the Girton interchange as well, but it doesn't solve the issues we're looking at. So we have got to do something. Second point is that 2020 traffic volumes, they have built up back again, but it's been largely through lockdown. We haven't been in post-vaccine world or working patterns. The technology businesses that I speak with very frequently, as well as retail, education, healthcare and hospitality businesses, want to be able to commute and work together. They want to commute reliably. They don't want to just work from home for the rest of their lives. And as I've said before, Cambridge will be more vital to the UK recovery post-COVID and Brexit than it has been before. So that's the second point on traffic. Third point is, I think there's been a lot of talk about bias. GCP, in my experience, looking at it from slightly the outside, raising eyebrow point of view, hasn't been biased in favour of any particular route. It has taken views because that's what we're here to do. But we do appreciate also that it is natural for any group of villages to have strong views, and so fully have been listening to those strong views, which are bound to come from any place that we suggest any change to. So I would hope going forward, and I think the review is a good way to do that, that we can be better at considering and communicating the overall benefits to the whole beautiful area that we live in, we're very lucky to live in, such that they're actually seen to outweigh the concerns that people very understandably do have. Thank you.
He said Phil.
Did he? Did he say?
Yeah, I've done it again. Sorry, apologies. Phil.
Thank you, Roger.
You go.
I'll be brief as well, and largely because I think Claire has said very eloquently some of the things that I was going to say. Like Lewis, I've been part of this process for what seems like a very long time, and is actually a very long time. And I agree with his assessment totally about how we got to now. But I also think it's important that we reflect on why we are here, and we're here to support and facilitate growth. And I think that brings me to Tim W.'s point about one of the reasons this has taken so long is actually a failure of governance. And I think we need to stand up and accept that. That said, I support the audit. I think it's important that we do check our work to date, particularly because there have been changes, including the decision on East-West Rail. I also support the other recommendations as well. There is still much to be done, and I include in that much work to be done with local communities and stakeholders. I would say on the audit though, and it's been mentioned already, that I do have a slight fear that however open and transparent we make it, it is not going to satisfy some that we have been fully open with the process. And I think we just need to be aware that that might well be the case when we come back to look at this next June.
Thanks, Phil. James.
Yes, thank you, Roger. Just a question for Peter, if I may. If you could give us your work on your northern route that you've done, so we can understand why it's been dismissed. We'd be very grateful. So it's a request, if I may. You know, Peter spoke about the technical guidance has been followed, but the reality is how many boxes have been ticked. It can't be argued that the public have been brought along on this. It's certainly been under consultation as far as I can see. A lot of people are really angry about this route, and I think that's because they don't feel they've been consulted with appropriately or listened to. And I thought the local liaison forums, Helen Bradbury spoke magnificently well, and I would be very concerned if I was trying to push through a public transport solution that had left the public behind so wantonly. And I think that's something that you should be very concerned about. Clearly, I'm not voting on this, so I've got no view really on the vote. I'm just putting points across in this. And I think that there was a couple of points made about the BCR. Well, the changes to the BCR are nothing to do with wealthy South Cambridge. They're about areas where there's left behind areas where people are struggling to get BCR values because of low values of finance, not because of high values of finance. And I think ultimately, it is imperative to get public transport right, not to rush it through when you've not got it right. And I would look very closely at what you're voting through here, and in your heart of hearts, know if you've got it right. Because just banging through a bit of public transport to support Bourne Airfield and West Cambridge isn't looking at the long-term solution for the wealth and the success of the Cambridge region, and isn't going to uphold the principles of the Spear Report. So, you know, I want to work with you guys, I really do, but I think that there's an unseemly haste here that is going to be damaging, and ultimately, whatever you do, you've got to take the people with you. You can't ignore them. You're better to over-consult and get it right and rush things through. Thank you.
Thanks, James. And I'll just bring Peter in very quickly on that first request of sharing information. I'm assuming that's happening and happened, etc. And anything that we haven't will happen, Peter.
Yeah, obviously all the information's on the website. We've shared it with CPCA officers previously, but clearly in terms of James's request, we will do that again.
Thank you. Thank you. Claire, you want to come back in?
Just a very quick one, James. Briefly, you mentioned that you don't get a vote, but we are always asked, Phil and I as non-voting members, how we would vote before the voting members cast their official votes. So you do get your voice heard at all times on this committee.
Thanks, Claire. Okay, so I haven't got anyone else that wishes to speak on this. I mean, for me, there's two things here. As I've said before, I welcome us considering going to the environmental impact assessment. I do think that's the chance that we all have to look at the concerns that we keep getting emailed about and talked about, etc. We recognise St Neots Road in Hardwick. We also recognise Coton, we recognise Westfields, etc. Until we start looking at this and spending money and seeing what mitigation can look like, then we're going to be talking about this for a very long time. So I do welcome us considering going on to that. I think the most important thing here is the audit review. And this audit review, and we keep talking about it because it is important, we need to get this right. And we don't want to be talking about how it happened, why it happened, the process of it. We want to be talking about the results of it when we get those results. And I can't remember, I think it was Phil said, you know, you won't be able to please everyone with the audit review. And that's absolutely right. Obviously, there are some people that are entrenched in a view supporting or against or whatever. But it is important to have a transparent, robust audit review. And I think for surety going forward as well, when you look at where we are, if you look at page 59 that I think Joe mentioned before, and you know, we're only on stage 2 now, and we've taken a long time to get to this stage, and we have a lot of other hoops to jump through, and some sort of robust audit to make sure that everything we've done is the right thing that we've done or not, is very, very important at this stage. So I welcome that too. So does anyone else have anything they wish to say on this at all before I go to the recommendations? I'm not seeing anything. So I want to take the recommendations on block, if I may. Does anyone have a problem with me taking the recommendations on block A to F? If you do, please raise your blue hand. I'm not seeing any blue hands, so I will take them on block. But I will go and ask everyone individually, as Claire has mentioned that we should do, just to see if it's a yes for support or a no for not supporting. So could I just ask, Claire, could you start us off with that, please?
I fully support the recommendations that are being made.
Okay, thank you. Phil?
I fully support them too, Roger.
James, for the record?
No, I don't support.
Okay, thank you. So Neil?
I support the recommendations, and just with respect to June, I would hope, Roger, that we work with the officers in expedite, make sure that we can meet that June deadline for the.
I agree, absolutely, Neil. I think we've covered that. Thank you. Lewis?
Support.
And for the record, I also support recommendations A to F. So therefore, A to F is carried. Thank you, absolutely everyone that has had input into this today and the years and months leading up to this. I'm going to take a break now. We've been at this for a couple of hours. So can I suggest that we're back by 6:15, please? 6:15, so we have a 15-minute break. Thank you very much. Welcome back, everyone. We'll just wait for a couple of others. Are we ready, Nick?
The stream is still on, Chair, yes.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, so let's reconvene. Thank you everyone for coming back. So moving on, agenda item 9. So future investment strategy. So I'm going to handle this by taking public questions, receive the officer response to questions, then I'll ask Tim Bick to come in because he indicated he wanted to, officer to introduce the report, and then have the board debate. So I'd like to invite Roxanne Bow to join the meeting and ask a question submitted by Campbell, please.
Hello, thank you.
Hi, Roxanne.
Hello. Excellent. So this is a question from Cambridge Cycling Campaign relating to agenda item 9, GCP Future Investment Strategy. CamCycle is pleased to see that the Future Investment Strategy report recognises the important role that cycling can play in addressing local issues and contributing to the GCP's goals. It's clear that people want to cycle more, the government wants people to cycle more, businesses expect their employees to cycle more, and public feedback from consultations and the Citizens' Assembly recognise cycling's role in tackling air pollution, congestion and climate change. We should say health there as well. We therefore strongly welcome the proposal for targeted investment to close gaps and establish important links in the cycling network. We also welcome the new criteria assessing whether transport schemes support the delivery of net zero carbon objectives across Greater Cambridge. How will this investment be coordinated with other schemes which have a bearing on the cycling infrastructure network, such as the GCP Eastern Access Project or the Combined Authority Project to improve the Coldhams Lane roundabout, which still requires additional funding for a properly cycle-proof design? How will these cycling projects tie in with COVID-19 Tranche 2 schemes like modal filters on Arbury Road and junction improvements at the Barnwell Newmarket Road roundabout? Testing these interventions can speed up the process and have immediate benefits to the local community and commuters. The National Audit Office made it clear last week that if we are to achieve the goal of net zero by 2050, we must make drastic changes to how we live and travel. Do the GCP plans go far enough to enable Greater Cambridge to reach net zero? If the GCP is serious about net zero carbon objectives, then they must heed the advice from Citizens' Assembly to be bold. We urge the GCP to be ambitious with the locations and the solutions chosen for this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Roxanne. I'd now like to invite Edward Lee to join the meeting and ask his question. Edward.
Thank you very much.
Hi. Off you go.
Okay, so my question is essentially why GCP is in the business of building roads and car parks, when neither of these is consistent with the Paris Climate Agreement nor the UK's Climate Change Act. The future scenario GCP is still planning for is one in which the planning will be hostile not only to economic growth, but to life itself. Busways are supposedly needed to let buses bypass congestion. Yet until all energy supplies are zero carbon, the only effective policy to reduce carbon emissions from transport is for citizens and businesses to reduce vehicle miles. Page 81 of the agenda pack shows a proposed bus network for the Campbell busway. Nothing about it depends on there being a busway. The same would be true of the South East and Waterbeach busways. Using the Bus Services Act, the Combined Authority is empowered to design and commission exactly the bus services the county needs. All that is missing is a revenue stream to subsidise those services. But busways won't generate a revenue, quite the reverse. They will create a substantial additional management and maintenance cost for users and the Highway Authority. HM Treasury is now actively looking at road pricing, so I urge board members not to waste precious money on unnecessary busways, but to invest in what is needed to start the transition to a zero carbon economy. That includes build out the cycle greenways and keep going, build travel hubs, not huge car parks, to give people everywhere in Greater Cambridge convenient, safe and secure access to bus and rail services. Intervene tactically in the road network to prioritise buses. Prepare now to spend the allocated £75 million to commission new bus services as we emerge from the pandemic. Implement a workplace parking levy. And finally, work with government to design a road pricing scheme that serves local as well as national needs. Thank you, Chair.
Edward, thank you very much for that. I'd now like to invite Isabel Wade, Head of Transport Strategy, to respond to those public questions. Isabel, hi.
Cool, thank you very much. And thank you to Roxanne and Edward for your questions. So just taking the question from CamCycle first. So the GCP will continue to work with partners to coordinate investment in the cycling network, and the work to identify gaps in the network will consider what other proposals or other funding is already in existence. This will include the COVID-19 active travel schemes, as well as proposals from the GCP, County Council, Combined Authority and other partners. So you also asked about zero carbon. So tackling climate change and emissions from transport will take a combined effort from both local and national partners. It's not just something the GCP can do alone, but meeting net zero does require both modal shift to public transport and active travel, as well as decarbonisation of the transport network more widely. And the GCP Sustainable Travel Programme will support the achievement of net zero ambitions by creating a network that will provide more people with a competitive alternative to using their car. And the Future Investment Strategy also proposes investment to support the bus fleet to move to zero emission vehicles. Just turning to the question from Edward. So the GCP is investing in a range of sustainable travel projects to create a network that offers people an alternative to their car and supports our partners to meet their zero carbon ambitions. The programme does not include road schemes, but does include dedicated public transport routes, enabling enhanced services and connections, and several travel hubs, which are designed to facilitate multimodal journeys. The City Access project has undertaken analysis of a range of options to free up road space within the city and create a revenue stream for bus services, which was set out in detail at the Executive Board's meeting in February. This work has emphasised the importance of ensuring people have good alternatives to travel by car if demand management is to be successful.
Thank you, Isabel. Thank you for that. I'd now like to invite Tim Bick back in because you wanted to speak on this, Tim.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to speak in relation to paragraphs 5.5 to 5.9 on page 108 and 109. It's about the use of the £75 million which was allocated to pump prime bus services ahead of a potential demand management scheme for private cars. There was widespread concern over the potential redeployment of this money at the Assembly. It wasn't just some members, as it's been translated into in your report. In fact, everyone who spoke shared the same view. But the next report on your agenda on city access sets out an approach which still makes the need for that £75 million as valid as when it was previously allocated. If we are to anticipate a regime of demand management for private cars in the city, which is still on our drawing board, we all agreed that it was necessary for that to be preceded by a general uplift in the frequency and the hours and the geographic scope of the current bus network. Sistra prepared a report to show what that could consist of. This was considered vital to carry the confidence of the public that a much improved alternative to the car was tangible, because this would be before a demand management scheme was there to generate any income to subsidise that uplift in service. It required a direct upfront subsidy from us. After a demand management scheme was in place, the startup funding from the GCP would cease, and the funding would be taken over by the income derived from the demand management scheme. Now, I know of no way that excellent public transport will not be essential to the future of the city and those travelling to it in the future. And although bus services are obviously in a recession today, I don't know of any reason for that which isn't exclusively linked to this pandemic, which none of us are expecting to be permanent. It's welcome that officers have stepped back from actually reallocating this £75 million now, but it is clear that this has not been dropped. And it is regrettable that this leaves a question over a key mainstream option for the long term and would achieve a sustainable modal shift. The three strands that are being referred to in relation to this £75 million aren't substitutes for each other. More cycle schemes, as Roxanne has discussed, and electric buses are both excellent things for us to achieve, but they shouldn't be set off against each other. They're not alternatives. The need to improve bus services to beat congestion has been one of the most consistently supported strands of our work, but it is the one that we have, after 5 years, done very little to actually bring about. And that important strategic strand shouldn't be preempted just because we haven't yet got round to it. So I would urge members of the board and officers to think further about this and not to take decisions about the reallocation of this money until we know that we don't need it to support a demand management scheme, which is later on your agenda and you're bringing forward decisions about anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. So now can I invite Isabel to introduce the report in front of us?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the purpose of the future investment strategy is to outline how the Greater Cambridge Partnership will make investments across the period of the City deal in order to maximise benefits to local residents and businesses. And the Executive Board considered an initial future investment strategy back in March 2019. So this report is presenting an updated future investment strategy for approval. The aim of the review was to respond to the current evidence base, particularly the impact of COVID, but also to reflect on and demonstrate the GCP's legacy and impact on our area over the course of the City deal following the successful Gateway review earlier this year. So in terms of that evidence, it's clear that COVID has had a significant impact on both the economy and on travel and transport. And I won't go through that in detail. It's set out in your paper, but just to say we continue to closely monitor the situation and as been touched on earlier, we are seeing people return to cars much more quickly than other modes. Public transport does continue to be severely impacted by the pandemic, both financially and in terms of patronage. Of course, the two are linked. But we do see that the nature of the economy is such that public transport will be vital in the longer term. And as others have said, you know, whilst home working has been a feature of the last few months, there are many businesses for whom that's not an option longer term, or who wouldn't want to, you know, fully move to that sort of model in the future. Alongside that, the reviews also considered the updated environmental objectives of the partners, including net zero commitments, and it's clear that a significant shift to sustainable transport is needed to meet these alongside decarbonisation. So the future investment strategy is produced in this context and is trying to strike a balance between investing to support a green recovery whilst remaining mindful of some of the uncertainty facing particularly public transport operators. So the review found that the programme agreed in 2019 remains vital to the success of the area, but did identify a small number of gaps where additional action is needed, and it proposes the following. So first, recognising the need for flexibility in the current circumstances, the updated future investment strategy proposes developing proposals within the previous 75 million public transport allocation to develop a fund to enable operator investment in zero emission buses, and also to develop a further programme of permanent active travel measures building on the emergency active travel schemes. So this is obviously the area that Councillor Bick alluded to in his chair's report from the Joint Assembly, and officers have taken that feedback on board and are no longer suggesting that there is a upfront allocation of money towards these two areas, but that instead the fund becomes more flexible, which we continue to think is sensible in the current circumstances, particularly around kind of moving towards a zero emission fleet. In being able to expand the public transport network in terms of services will mean that we have to invest also in kind of zero emission buses alongside that in order not to adversely affect air quality. So those two things are important. But what we've made clear is that before any money is actually committed, before those allocations are actually made, we will do the work to demonstrate, how the achievement of the objectives, particularly the objectives around enhancement of services in the public transport network, can be met within the within the allocation, rather than at this stage kind of moving any money away. So important to say that all proposals obviously subject to business cases, so that will be covered off at that point. The second area of additional investment would be a £20 million fund to unlock housing delivery, and this is recognising the key role of the City deal in this area, and particularly how that role is taken forward in the current economic circumstances. And it's suggested this funding is designed in a recoverable way. The third area is the SMART programme, where an allocation of 2.8 million is suggested to continue the programme of work supporting the City deal and its objectives. The other thing just to mention is that the Future Investment Strategy does recognise the allocation made towards the skills service earlier this week in response to the pandemic, so picks up things across the different work streams there. So in total, these additional allocations, alongside the proposals that you're considering in other papers at this meeting, take the programme to just over 750 million, of which 20 million is identified as recoverable investment. That's against a projected income at the moment of 603 million. There's obviously a gap there, but it's felt that in the current circumstances, over-programming is appropriate at this point. What it does mean is that further prioritisation will be needed in the future, or additional funds will need to be secured, and that includes exploring income generation opportunities. So just in summary, the board is recommended to approve an updated future investment strategy that includes significant investment in sustainable travel infrastructure to support a green recovery, and adds a series of targeted interventions across our programme to support the economy and recovery. Has some updated prioritisation criteria to better reflect environmental objectives, and overall proposes a flexible approach, the aim of which is to put GCP in a strong position to respond to the pandemic and subsequent trends and to meet our longer-term objectives.
Thanks, Isabel. Just one quick one for me for clarity, and then a question as well. Demand management has been mentioned, and for a lot of people, demand management equals congestion charge. Can you tell me what demand management means in this, please?
Yep, so demand management essentially means encouraging people to not to use their cars, but to use sustainable forms of transport. So the City Access paper has explored several different types of demand management. So broadly, there's kind of fiscal demand management, which includes charging, such as a congestion charge or a pollution charge, but it also could include physical demand management, such as kind of changing kind of road space allocation or kind of parking as well. So there are different types.
Okay, thank you. And the first question for me, and please others put your blue hand up if you want to come in off the back of me, because it's a relatively short question. I was at a meeting earlier today whereby they were talking about zero carbon, and obviously electric vehicles were in there, but hydrogen fuel cells were being discussed quite robustly, in so much as a giant supermarket chain in Switzerland, all their lorries, their HGVs are going over to it, buses for longer journeys, etc. They're now looking at it, and it's not something that's going to happen tomorrow. It's going to be something that happens apparently towards the end of this decade and early 30s. I'm just wondering where that is in our grand scheme of things, because I was putting in Control F to find out where hydrogen was in the paper, and it only appears in 7.11, just as a comparison to diesel engines. So what's our thinking at the moment?
Yeah, so I think at the moment I'm kind of quite positive about hydrogen as a future solution for buses. I think that places who have started looking at it have found that it does offer the range that buses require in order to kind of operate on some of our routes. I think that there are some challenges around it, particularly ensuring that it is actually green hydrogen and isn't kind of hydrogen produced by burning fossil fuels. Also, of course, there's kind of the distribution of it and putting it into vehicles, which would need working through. I think that the aim of the kind of proposal in the paper is at the moment to not kind of pick a particular technology, but to acknowledge that actually we'll need to trial things in the Greater Cambridge area over the next few years, see what works, and work with the Combined Authority and other partners to come up with a kind of long-term plan towards kind of decarbonising kind of the public transport fleet.
Yeah, I know it's in its infancy. I think there's something like 270 cars on the UK road at the moment, or vehicles, but that are using hydrogen. But great. Okay, opening it up. Claire, you're first.
Thank you, Chair. Potentially even more alarming, there's quite a lot of talk about mini nuclear cogeneration as well as hydrogen, which obviously could be quite a good way to go, but that's for a different day discussing that. You can imagine the reactions. One thing I'm really keen on is that we balance our efforts and finances to be fair to those lucky enough to be able to walk and cycle, and those who do need to travel further than they can actively travel. So I'm really keen that we make sure we continue to be fair to those in the wider region, not just those within the city centre and in range of Mill Road. One way to look at that is to find ways to reuse and regenerate more funding so we can do more of the things that we want to do. We've got a long list, we can't afford them all. And for example, we've got the SMART programme, which has always raised a lot of money alongside the funding that we put in from GCP. The electricity grid is another potential one from the Environment and Economy group. And we've got topics such as road and other pricing. I'm just keen that we look in our future investment strategy at those ways that we can reuse and regenerate, as well as just spend the money that we're being given. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. I don't think that needed a response from Isabel. There was concern, obviously, from Tim, Tim Big, about allocating the funds now without knowing all the ins and outs. So, what would be your response to that?
So I would say at this stage, you're kind of making broad allocations. You're not specifically committing funding to any particular area. What you're doing at this point in time is saying we think that because of the circumstances we find ourselves in, we should be looking at kind of a broader range of opportunities across to use this funding. But what we are clear about is that when we bring forward proposals for you actually to make that funding commitment and to spend that money, officers will need to be clear about kind of what the impact is on the other areas of spending it on something. So if we bring forward something to say, spend this amount on kind of supporting zero emission buses, we will need to say to you, that leaves you with this for kind of cycling in the public transport network, and the impact of that is that. So it means that we have the opportunity to do the work to ensure that we are in a position to meet the ambitions around forward funding a public transport network, but that we also recognise at this point in time we do need to kind of work on several things in parallel to put us in a strong position going forward.
Okay, so this is more go away, work it up, bring us back the case, the business case, whatever, and then it comes back to us before anything happens. Is that right? Yeah, I'm seeing the nods.
Yes,
okay,
absolutely.
thank you. Neil.
Yep, thanks, Chair. So I'm, I guess, key part of the recommendation is part D, which is the criteria of prioritisation of future investment and the inclusion of the environmental objective, which I think is right. In fact, in the current environment, it looks a real admission that they were not there in the first place. So I support that. In terms of comments raised by the Assembly, I have my sympathy with those. I think you've addressed them as you've just discussed with the chair. The challenge for me on the investment in any zero emission budget is to demonstrate the additionality of it and the value for money of it. I can see how it's going to be very easy to spend the money, but it's the demonstration that we're actually getting something real, which wouldn't have happened anyway, out of it. And I think that's just to be transparent. I think that's going to be a big challenge in that area. But I'm comfortable with where your recommendations are and the basis under which you've discussed it.
I agree, Neil. I mean, the question has to be asked: Would something happen organically for companies to carry on and it still be in business the way the world's going at the moment? So, anyway, everything's going to come back to us, as Isabel said. So, Lewis.
Yeah, just very briefly support the strategy, but recognise that we do need to evidence on the environment. So, certainly for the city, the issue of fresh air and healthy air is critical as well. We already know from the bounce back of car numbers and the non-use of public transport that we're getting major congestion at certain areas of the city, and that's really unhealthy. But I think, so that's number one. I just think that I will be pressing for us to relook at a clean air zone aspect, and obviously the electric buses and a number of other measures help that. We could also be looking to build on what's been done on the emergency traffic regulation orders. I think what we've been missing is a strategy on that. It's all been totally piecemeal. And I think we've had to give some of the money back to the government, which doesn't help either. So I think we need to try and pull together other measures, work with partners, including the Combined Authority and the County Council. And that my last point, Chair, is we need to evidence milestones on net zero carbon. It isn't enough just to think it's a long time in the future. We do need to have clear achievements by 2025. And aspects like hydrogen, I think are actually going to move us far quicker than some of the focus on electric vehicles, albeit that they'll play their part. So endorse the strategy, and the need for us to look at net zero carbon a lot harder. Yeah, I mean, from what I was learning today, and I really mean learning today about hydrogen, is it doesn't take away from electric. Each of them actually enhances the other. They don't overlap much at all. So it'd be interesting to see how that happens. With respect to ETROs, of course, the government gave us such a short time to actually implement some in the first place. But we did well to do what we did. But obviously, there's more that could be done. Okay, so Lewis, I think that's a legacy hand, unless you wanted to come back in, is it? Yeah. Okay, I've got no one else that wishes to speak on this. So as long as everyone's in agreement, if you're not, please raise your hand. I'm going to take the recommendations A to G on block. No one's actually saying they don't want to do that. So I won't go around everyone. I'll just ask if you have any, if you don't support this at all on any part or anything, or you need to abstain, can you raise your blue hand? Otherwise, I'll take it on affirmation. No one's raising their blue hand, so I'm passing that on affirmation. Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone involved in that. Thank you, Isabel, for presenting it. Agenda item 10, public transport improvements and city access strategy. I'm going to handle this pretty much the same as the last question, last agenda item. Public questions. Officer response to those public questions, then I'm going to bring in Tim Vick, who wished to speak on this, and then officer presentation, and then executive board debate. So I'd like to invite back Roxanne DeBow to ask your question on behalf of Campbell Cycle. Welcome back.
Thanks, you're doing well. It's already a long meeting.
It's getting late.
We're sticking with it. Okay, Cam Cycle's question for agenda item 10, public transport improvements and city access strategy. Cam Cycle welcomes more detail on the city access strategy and supports the short-term measures being implemented to encourage more people to walk and cycle. More secure cycle parking at workplaces and in the city centre is very important to address issues of cycle theft, particularly when seeking to increase uptake in the use of e-bikes. We also strongly support the city centre freight pilot with the increased use of cycle logistics. CamCycle also supports a more wide-scale programme of road space reallocation to create safe and attractive active travel routes, and agrees that if this is coordinated with a review of car parking and the city road network hierarchy and communicated well as a whole scheme, it is more likely to achieve high levels of modal shift and public support. However, we believe that the recommendations underestimate the impact that could be achieved by fast, ambitious action. For example, Leicester's pop-up cycle network, 11 miles in 10 weeks, has already increased cycling by 45%, and school street schemes in London have had a huge impact on modal shift, and we are seeing that locally as well. We'd like to again emphasise that the GCP must heed the advice of the Citizens' Assembly and be much bolder with your approach. Why have we not yet seen progress or pre-consultation on the Active Travel Fund Tranche 2 schemes? Will the GCP work with the County Council, Combined Authority and City Council to produce an overarching strategy for the current and proposed schemes so that they can be considered in context for achieving short and long-term ambitious aims of traffic reduction and increasing active travel, rather than these being decided by piecemeal consultations? Thank you.
Thank you, Roxanne. Could I now ask the officer, I assume it's Wilma, to read out the question submitted by the Windsor Road Residents Association?
Yes, Chair, the question reads as follows. We are concerned about the process and timing of decisions on permanency of the ETROs. 1. When will decisions about the permanency of schemes be made? What is the role of the current consultations? What else will be taken into account? 2. How are the effects of the ETROs to be assessed? Will the results of the consultations be binding, and, if so, how can other representations and longer-term effects be taken into consideration? See Agenda page 128, section 4.8. 3. Is it sensible to make permanent decisions while conditions are atypical? 4. Would it not be wise to wait until a more stable situation appears to have been reached, when the social effects of the COVID-19 virus have diminished and travel patterns have stabilised? We are glad the GCP is monitoring traffic. The data presented are for September and November 2020. Presumably comparative figures are available for the time before ETROs were introduced, and monitoring will continue. The current situation is abnormal. Many people are still working from home and limiting their shopping and leisure activities. In addition, there are roadworks on major routes into and out of Cambridge. It is hard to be sure of cause and effect when multiple factors change simultaneously. 5. What will be the criteria for selecting particular roads for ETROs in future? It seems to us that not all the current ETROs improve the cycling or walking experience, although they do affect motor traffic, which usually has to take a longer route, directly causing inconvenience. Traffic already using this route is also inconvenienced indirectly by worsened congestion and air pollution. Pollution will also adversely affect active travellers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Wilma. Isabel, could I invite you to respond to those questions, please?
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for both the questions. So just taking the one from CamCycle first. So the government confirmed the emergency active travel fund allocations last month, as well as enhanced consultation requirements for tranche 2 schemes. The GCP is working with the County Council on implementation of tranche 2 road space reallocation measures in this context, and we hope to give a firmer timeframe for that very soon. In terms of kind of more widely, the GCP continues to work closely with partners on the programme of schemes as a whole and how these support both active travel and social distancing in the context of COVID-19, as well as their potential to offer longer term benefits. The proposed review of the city highway network hierarchy will also help to influence and inform future investment in active travel measures. And then just turning to the question from the Windsor Roads Residents Association. So decisions on the permanency of schemes will be taken in the autumn next year. So this will include consideration of the response to the public consultations, along with the objections and representations received throughout the whole of the trial period. The board and the County Council's Highways and Transport Committee will consider the responses before the County Council determines the statutory objections received and takes final decisions on the future of the experimental measures. The traffic monitoring data that has been collected for each of the Tranche 1 schemes will also be presented to the Executive Board and the Highways and Transport Committee to support the decision-making process. And whilst traffic flow data has been captured at each of the trial sites, there is no comparable before data for all sites. So we'll have to look at that in the round. All the traffic data available, both before and during the trial period, will be made available along with the data that has been collected more widely across the city as part of the monitoring of impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. GCP is working closely with the County Council to determine arrangements for implementation of a second tranche of experimental traffic management schemes. A full list of the schemes, including those being led by the GCP, was published with the County Council's Highways and Transport Committee papers earlier this year. Any further ETRO proposals beyond that would be a matter for the County Council as the Highway Authority to consider, and the GCP would of course look to provide support with that if asked.
Thanks, Isabel. And from a County Council perspective, I can't add to anything you said there, so thank you for that. So Isabel, could you actually introduce the report, please? Oh, Tim, I'm sorry, and thank you. I have got you written down. I said it was getting late. Tim, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just to say that the Assembly did advance a significant point in relation to the long-term city access strategy. And as I mentioned earlier, that was to show some impatience about how long it's taking to get to, and it's a very unsatisfactory expression, to get to a roadmap for it, because we all know it's out there and have done for 5 years, but we've never really got to grips with it and laid out where we're trying to get to. And just as a very practical example of why I think this is really important, even to some of the short-term measures that we are taking, like the road space reallocation measures that are supporting cycling and walking. These are widely supported within the Assembly as a way to go. They sort of envision a city which is more pleasant for people to walk around in a healthy way and to cycle around in a healthy way and to enjoy their surroundings more. But you can see already that there is a logical end point to those sort of schemes without a long-term strategy overarching them in relation to demand management in the city. Because without that end point, we are effectively channeling more traffic onto fewer and fewer roads, making actually those roads and people living on them or traveling along them more miserable, more polluted and more congested. And so we should certainly pursue what we're doing there, and I support what Roxanne advocated, but we do need to bring along that long-term strategy, otherwise we're going to reach the limits for those kind of neighbourhood schemes simply because of the aggregated effect they have across the whole city. So I am wanting to register that since the Assembly, the recommendations that you have been redefined to bring forward a decision about where we're going on the long-term strategy, and I'd like to welcome that. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. So Isabel, if you could introduce the report, and if you feel you need to respond to anything Tim said there, then please do as well.
Cool. Thank you. So this paper builds on previous reports that you've seen, particularly those considered by the board in February and June of this year, looking at how the GCP can tackle congestion, reduce emissions and provide better public transport. So in particular, updates on progress implementing the short-term measures, as well as work undertaken on packages of longer-term measures, including a preliminary integrated impact assessment. So as for the previous item, there are some particular challenges arising from COVID-19 that have created a level of uncertainty and have also affected the design and implementation of some measures, particularly those around public transport services. So I think this picks up on the point that Tim makes about kind of progress towards a longer term strategy. I think what we've tried to do in this paper is pick out elements that we think at the moment progress can be made with, alongside recognising the push from the Joint Assembly to kind of make wider progress and therefore bring forward that review date to March and look particularly at the kind of public transport service element there as well. So the key factors that are going to shape the future strategy do include things that we're kind of currently looking at the moment. So the extent and nature of the impact of COVID-19 and Brexit on the greater Cambridge economy, the extent to which changes to working and travel patterns will continue in the long term, and also the future of public transport, both in terms of regulation and in terms of kind of funding and patronage as well. So the report and recommendations are trying to balance those things, pick up the point from the Joint Assembly, and try to move things forward as much as we can, really. So back in June, the board agreed some short-term measures to support sustainable travel, and they agreed that those should be taken forward in the context of supporting recovery from COVID-19. Progress has been made on those, in particular the implementation of road space reallocation schemes, working with the County Council. There's also been development of e-cargo bike and e-bike schemes, both kind of by GCP, county, city and the combined authority. Options are being developed for additional secure cycle parking, and we're working closely with some stakeholders on a freight pilot as well. So at the same time, whilst we haven't been able to make progress on kind of investment in public transport services and in a fare pilot as we had hoped to do, we have been able to start developing an expansion to the next phase of the electric bus pilot. So kind of bits and bobs there. Alongside this, the paper sets out a series of packages on potential future measures which have been developed. If you looked at figure 1 on page 185, that outlines the 5 packages and the process of developing these that we have gone through. So package 1 is the short-term measures, which are set out in the paper. Package 2 takes the short-term measures, but also includes a clean air zone targeted at buses and freight, which is designed to meet air pollution targets. There are then 3 variations of package 3, which all build on top of packages 1 and 2. Package A, we've called Space for People, and that's kind of taking kind of tools around road space reallocation and kind of parking availability and using those to create more space, particularly for walking, cycling, but also public transport. B is kind of taking objectives around clean air and zero carbon, so looking at how we can decarbonise the fleet and accelerate that, but then bringing in a pollution charge to kind of lock in those changes later. And package C, we've called Better Buses for Everyone, and that would include the delivery of something akin to the full network proposed in the sister report published earlier this year, before then bringing in a flexible charge to fund that in the longer term. The report describes the measures in all of these packages in more detail, but it's important to emphasise at this point that they are illustrative. They are there kind of designed to help facilitate some discussion around kind of what should be in a future package. They're not firm proposals, and obviously any of them, if they were to be taken forward, would require extensive design work. A preliminary integrated impact assessment has been undertaken to understand the potential impact of these packages, and that's intended to help inform that discussion as well. And this has found that package 1 has a relatively low impact on congestion and air pollution, but does provide momentum and help to inform future interventions. Package 2, the clean air zone, would encourage a cleaning up of commercial vehicles and support better air quality, but it doesn't have as many benefits to kind of cycling and walking and public transport in terms of kind of road space for those those vehicles and doesn't impact on congestion. All three of the more extensive packages have been found to have positive benefits, but also some disadvantages and risks. So package 3A, Space for People, it found this is likely to reduce car trips and increase active travel in areas of reallocated space, but there is a risk of displacement. Care is needed not to disadvantage people who are less able to switch modes easily, and there is less ability in this package to provide public transport alternatives as there isn't a funding stream. Therefore, there is kind of more limited impact on modal shift. Package 3B has a significant impact on air quality and some congestion benefits as well, although these start to fade over time as more people move towards using electric vehicles. And again, care needs to be taken with these measures not to disadvantage low-income groups or SMEs who might be less able to switch towards cleaner vehicles. Package 3C, the integrated impact assessment found that there was significant positive impact on access to employment and other destinations, on air quality and zero carbon benefits, although the latter of these is dependent on there being a cleaner bus fleet as well to service the wider network. So taking this work alongside the wider situation that we find ourselves in, the report recommends an approach whereby, you know, we crack on with the short-term measures as much as we can. We build on these by taking additional action in two areas that will be key to any future package. So specifically reducing air pollution and carbon emissions by taking steps to drive forward the cleaning of the bus fleet through a twin track approach of developing support for operators alongside working with our partners to develop measures to ensure only clean buses operate in certain areas. The second part then is reallocating road space to support sustainable modes. So that's by working with the county and city councils to review the road network hierarchy and also working with partners to further develop plans to maintain access, particularly for disabled groups and blue badge holders. So as I mentioned, on top of that, responding to the Joint Assembly, we have recommended that we bring a paper to the board at the next opportunity, which is in March, to set out additional progress, and in particular, looking at how GCP could support people to get back onto public transport post-pandemic and take steps towards longer-term delivery of an improved network. The final point I was just going to make was that to enable delivery of the project over the next 2 years, it's suggested that an additional £9.9 million of funding is made available in order to deliver those measures. So that's it from me, and very happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Isabel. And obviously there's been some comments already on the buses and cleaning up of the buses, as you put it, and obviously taking account of what the Assembly has put forward as well. James.
Yeah, thanks, Roger, and thanks for the presentation, Isabel.
James, could I ask you? I don't know if it's the same for everyone else. You're very faint with me on hearing. Could you get a bit closer, maybe?
Yeah, sure. So
that's better. Yeah.
So
thank you.
Not like me to be quiet. I apologise. So again, thank you, Isabel, for the presentation. There's a couple of concerns that I have here from a combined authority perspective, and I really would like to get us into a situation where we could solve some of these issues. So several of the points, several of the items in this presentation are statutory responsibilities of the combined authority, and there hasn't been any discussions with any of the officer team at the combined authority at all. I would like us to get in a situation where we're in the same space and we can be agreed on what you're trying to achieve. But I'm concerned about the legality of what's going through here at this moment in time. My request, it's entirely up to the board, my request is we defer this item and then bring it forward at a later date when there's been adequate discussion through combined authority as well, bearing in mind the statutory responsibilities. I think, you know, had this item been brought forward when those responsibilities were with the county council, I think it would have been obviously fine, but that's not the case. And there's several things, and we're linking to issues, I can bring them up, but investment into additional bus services, development of a fare pilot, expanding the electric bus pilot. None of these have been discussed with the combined authority. The clean air zone is a proposal which would require the agreement of the combined authority. We've not been consulted on that either, and there's no mention at all in this of the local transport plan. So I want us to be able to be in the same place where we can be agreed, but at the moment I'm just flagging this up to you that this hasn't been discussed with the statutory body.
James, thank you for bringing that to our attention. Obviously, I'd like to take some advice on that. So Isabel or maybe Rachel, I don't know who to go to for that one at the moment. Would anyone like to advise?
Peter, do you want to kick off?
Oh, Peter, hi.
Hi, well, yeah, thank you, Chair. So this report is just bringing an update. It's not making any firm proposals today. We have been in discussions with combined authority officers about this. Obviously, if we need to up that, Mayor, then we're more than happy to do that. But I think importantly, this report is not taking any decisions today. It's just an update. And I think actually what we're suggesting is this report then comes back to a future meeting of the board in any case.
Peter, could I ask, because as you said that you were having discussions with officers at the combined authority, the Mayor was shaking his head. So could you just elaborate on that, please?
As Isabel's been involved in them, I'm sure she will.
Okay, Isabel, please.
Yep, I mean, so I meet with the combined authorities kind of bus manager every 2 weeks, and kind of we've shared these proposals at those meetings.
James, you want to come back on that at all?
Well, I've spoken to my directors and chief execs, and they're saying that's not the case. So
Can't hear anything.
I don't want to have an open argument here. You know, I've put my point very clearly, very succinctly. As I said, my senior officer team are telling me this is the case. I wouldn't be putting this point to this meeting in a public forum if I hadn't got absolute clarity of what I was saying. I
can't hear you, James. Sorry.
I just want to work with your team, with the team, to get this right. And all I'm saying is that the sensible thing here would be to defer and discuss further in future.
All right, James, thank you. I'm still unsure on the legalities of this, as the Mayor has questioned it at all. Peter, you're saying this is just an update on what's going on and there's no decisions being made here, but obviously we're being asked to allocate funding, etc., going forward. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Well, any of your final decisions will be based on business case analysis and further information that Isabel went through in terms of when she produced the paper. So as of this paper in front of you today, it's an update report. You're not being asked to take specific decisions on it. And I think the report, and Isabel said in her introduction, we'll be looking to bring this back to you in a future meeting. And then clearly, as well as discussing with colleagues in the combined authority on the bus side, then I will happily take to meet the director, the relevant director of the combined authority during the course of those discussions at the same time.
Understood. I believe Isabel said coming back in March for some of it, but maybe later, obviously. I've got a couple of people that wish to speak on this. Claire?
Thanks, Roger. I'm not a politician, as you know. I support the principles regardless of which authority undertakes them. So general principles sound very good to me. Very pleased that we're now talking about clean rather than just electric. So I think that is different. I've lived in the region all my life. I'm used to being able to get around for my ideal personal convenience, but I have come to completely accept that we do need to be better citizens for each other and for the environment. So I need to do things that aren't ideal on any particular personal journey. I do use buses, but at the moment they unfortunately take longer and they're not as comfortable or convenient as being in my car. But I'm one of the lucky ones with a car in the middle of town. And I used to be able to park outside the market or Boots in the middle of town. I recognise now that we have got to be much better at doing things as a group. So thank you for the paper, and I'm not bothered which authority takes it up.
Thanks, Claire. Lewis?
Well, in terms of the response to James' point, we're not taking any specific decisions, but I do think that we should make a point of referencing in our proposals, particularly if we're going to get to decisions to spend money, a specific paragraph about the combined authority engagement. Isabel has said that she's been in dialogue every 2 weeks with the bus manager, but I think we can, if we're going to be proposing to spend money in March, we can actually just consider the issues consider the response of the combined authority and actually put a little section or a big section, depending on what our recommendation is in the report. But I'm happy to support this because we're not actually, James, allocating any funding.
Okay. So I've heard what people have to say on this, and James, I absolutely welcome working together on this. I think it's absolutely the right thing to do. Obviously, there has been some communication already, and there probably should be more. So look forward to that. The recommendations in front of us, as has been said, don't actually bind us to any decisions, etc. It's all going to come back. And if it comes back in March, then that's a good length of time. If it comes back after that, that's an even better length of time. So, James, I mean, with what you've said, I'm assuming that officers at the Combined Authority will be open and receptive to us getting in touch more so than we have. And so I'm quite happy to proceed with this. As long, and James, are you okay with what I've just said on that, please?
As I said, we're happy to work with you to make sure this is legally viable, what you're trying to do through this board, through this joint committee. And you know, I'm not here to try and cause problems. I'm trying to open, as to hand out an olive branch to make sure that this is right, so the decisions that this board makes are legally binding. And you know, we have got a local transport plan. You must adhere to it. It's a legal document. And we just want to make sure that what goes through on this board and the investments you want to make are ones that can be beneficial and can be legally achieved. So our officers will work with yours. We're open to that. And we just want to make sure you get it right.
Absolutely. And I think we all want the same and right and correct outcomes on this. So thank you for that. Okay, anyone else wish to speak on this at all? Okay, then I will proceed to the recommendations. We've got recommendations A, B, and C in front of us. I'll take them on block, and I'll say if anyone disagrees with them at all, could you raise your hand? Otherwise, I'll accept it on affirmation. Okay, I see no blue hands. So that is carried on affirmation. And obviously, with what's been discussed, we'll have a very close working relationship with the Combined Authority on this going forward, and look forward to it as well. Thank you very much for that. And James, it just goes to show this is why you need to be on this board. Thank you. Okay, moving on, and thank you, Isabel, for that. Moving on, agenda item 11, the Greater Cambridge Citizens Assembly 1 year on report. So I'm going to take the officer presentation and then executive board debate. We have no public questions on this. So Isabel, back to you again. She's gone.
Oh, Chair, I think she must have, her internet connection must have dropped out.
I thought she was going off to talk to the Combined Authority straight away.
No, she's been taken out, but she's been allowed back in.
Isabel, hi, welcome.
I'm not sure what happened there, but I'm back. And I just have a very brief introduction to the report if you would like me to make a start.
Yes, please.
Great. So the board committed to producing a 1 year on report detailing progress implementing the response to the Citizens Assembly. The draft is included at Appendix 1, and much of the content we've actually covered in the previous items. The report is informed by a workshop held with participants in September, which asked them to reflect on their recommendations in the light of COVID-19 and their priorities for action, and kind of points from that workshop is set out in a separate report written by Involve, who facilitated that. But in particular, I just wanted to mention that the Assembly members were keen to see some of the benefits of COVID, such as lower traffic levels and better air quality captured in the future. And they continue to feel that there should be a strong focus on investment in public transport going forward. So the board is asked to agree the draft 1 year on report, and also to agree to provide a further update in a year's time.
That's fine. Thank you, Isabel. Any comments or questions at all from the board, please? No? Oh, yes, Claire. Claire.
Just one suggestion. Have we been inviting the Citizens Assembly participants to listen in? Now we're on Zoom calls rather than on than having to travel into Shire Hall or whatever. I think it would be really nice to have them invited specifically to each of these board meetings and hear their comments later on, not as part of the meeting, but just as maybe a quick email after each meeting saying you're not being bold enough or go for something better.
Or we could make them sit through the recordings of them.
Yeah, and test them later.
Isabel, have we done anything like that?
So we have shared the meeting details with the participants so they can listen in if they choose to do so. If the board would like, I'm very happy to also seek kind of any comments on the meeting from them and share those back with you.
Yeah, and also to maybe just put a link out to those involved, and so it's easy for them to actually find the recording. That would be good. Okay. Claire, is that a legacy hand, or are you coming? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay, I've got no one else that wishes to speak on this, so we've got recommendations A to D on this one. So again, I'll take them on block, and anyone who doesn't agree, please raise your blue hand now. Otherwise, I'll take it on affirmation. I see no blue hand, so that is carried. Thank you very much. Thank you again, Isabel. Okay, moving on, agenda item 12, Greenways. As in field, so I'm going to take this public question and then officer response to public question, and then officer presentation, and then board debate. So I'd like to invite, I assume, Wilma to read out the question submitted by Leslie Sharrett. Wilma?
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm, Leslie Sharrett is the Chair of Grantchester Parish Council. The question is, Grantchester Parish Council welcomes the principles of the Greenways project and understands the need to provide for cyclists from Haslingfield having an off-road route to get to Cambridge safely. We have welcomed the Barton Greenway and are grateful for the constructive consultation carried out so far with the Greenways team that has been responsive to the particular needs of Grantchester's largely older population, the oldest in South Cambridgeshire, and need to keep Grantchester Road open. Unfortunately, the proposed route for the Haslingfield Greenway still raises safety concerns once it reaches the village of Grantchester for residents where it comes past the sheltered housing, for pedestrians through the very narrow parts, and for cyclists themselves where visibility is poor and where the highway has to be crossed 3 times. Our question is, with the link to the Barton Greenway after the M11 is crossed, and with the adoption of the bulk route as part of the Barton Greenway, is the substantial disruption to Grantchester Village, especially given its conservation status, its demographic, and the difficult safety issues, worth the cost of having the option of coming through the village when a safer, simple, and more fully off-road route across the bulk is already budgeted for? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Wilma. Peter, could you respond to that, please, or that questions?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Safety is the highest priority for the Greenway network. I mean, clearly routes must be safe, direct, attractive to use if we're to encourage people to choose active travel. The reason we're recommending a route through Grantchester as well as the bulk route is that it's more direct and it serves local centres, so Hawkston, Haslingfield, Grantchester and Newnham. We are mindful of the concerns of the Parish Council, and we will be working with them and other stakeholders through the design process to minimise impact and disruption on local residents.
Thank you, Peter. Okay, Peter, would you like to present the report?
Thank you, Chair. This is the last of the Greenways reports that you've received. You will receive in terms of this phase of development. Final report on Haslingfield, and the decision is a decision to proceed to the detailed design stage, as indeed with all the previous reports that you've received. This will come back to you next year to go through the next steps in terms of the process. Haslingfield Greenway links with the Melbourne Greenway and the Barton Greenway as part of the network, provides an important link in the part of the Greater Cambridge area. Their proposals have been discussed extensively with stakeholders, and we will clearly be doing that as we go through the design process. My colleague Simon Manville's here if you've got any detailed questions. Otherwise, happy to.
Oh, Peter, you muted yourself just before
I muted
the
myself
end
there, right at the end. Yeah, sorry, blew it at the end. No, happy to take any questions, Chair.
Okay, thank you, and welcome, Simon. Any questions at all for Peter or Simon from the board, please? I think this is pretty self-explanatory. I've got no questions at all. So, Simon, well, welcome and probably a very quick goodbye. So, I shall go to the recommendations, which are A to D. No, sorry, they are, yeah, no, A to D, I was right. So, again, Claire.
I just think we should pay respect to the officers and speak a little bit on each of these. I would just like to say that my father was born along this route, and even though he died 37 years ago, he would have been applauding this greenway as well as everybody else.
Well said, well said. Okay, I've got no one else that wishes to come in. So we've got recommendations A to D in front of us. I'll take them on block again. Anyone that disagrees with A to D, please raise your hand. I'm seeing no hands raised, so that's carried on affirmation. Thank you very much. And thank you, officers, for that. So agenda item 13, date of future meetings. The next meeting will take place at 4 p.m. on Thursday, the 18th of March, 2021. Okay, agenda item 14. So I plan to handle this this item in the following way: confirmation of late item by myself, public questions, officer response to public questions. Tim, you wanted to come in on this as well. Receive the presentation and then board debate. So I confirm that I have agreed to add a late item to the agenda. The purpose of the item is to consider requests from the County Council's Highways and Transport Committee on the 1st of December 2020, asking the GCP Executive Board to provide additional project funding for the Abbey Chesterton Bridge. This is being added to the agenda as an urgent item, as the GCP needs to be able to respond quickly to the request to clarify the status and funding of this project, and it would not be in the public interest to defer a decision until the next scheduled meeting. An addendum to the forward plan and published agenda was to be made available for public inspection as soon as possible. Okay, so then we go to public questions, and so I'd like to invite Roxanne back to ask the question on behalf of CamCycle. Roxanne, hi, welcome again.
Thank you again. We're nearly done. Okay. This is CamCycle's question about the Chisholm Trail. The Chisholm Trail is perhaps the most widely welcomed and popular GCP project and will help more local people to walk and cycle for everyday journeys and open up access to the city's precious green spaces. Research from active travel charity Sustrans estimates that the current level of cycling in Greater Cambridge saves the region over £100 million a year in healthcare costs and delivers additional benefits in terms of reducing congestion and air pollution. We support calls for a clear understanding of how local authorities manage transport projects and fuller public disclosure of what has caused these cost overruns. There seems to be a pattern of cost overruns on all transport projects. The continual delays for this project have long since passed unacceptable. The whole Chisholm Trail should be finished as soon as possible and to the highest possible standard so that local residents can make use of this new sustainable route, unlocking citywide benefits for all. CamCycle must question this slow progress and the additional risks that come from these delays, particularly the work on Coldham's Common, which must be started by the 15th of January Commons consent deadline. To miss this deadline would be a huge waste of the efforts of officers to get the permission to do this work on the Common, and further delays and costs will be added if permission must be sought again. Will the GCP confirm that work on Coldham's Common will begin before the required 15th of January deadline? Will the GCP confirm when the work on the Coldham's Lane crossing will begin? Will the GCP confirm when the Newmarket Road underpass work will commence? And please, can the GCP explain why work on these sections has not yet been started? But I'll just reiterate, we're so excited about the Chisholm Trail, and thank you for the work that has been done and for considering this agenda item.
Well, thank you for that positive note at the end, Roxanne. Thank you. Okay, and Peter, obviously I asked you to respond to that, but we've got one more question. I assume, Wilma, you're going to read it out, submitted by Jim Chisholm?
Yes, Mr. Chisholm's question is as follows. It has been a long time since I first wrote about a cycling route that could enable more to cycle both for work and utility trips in and around Cambridge. At that time, I suggested that building such a route would be of economic benefit and that money invested in cycleways would produce bigger savings for those using roads than money spent directly on roads. Non-user benefits are far better recognised now. I made no reference to health and well-being, nor to the connections to green spaces and the value for walking. The developments of Cambridge North Station and the North East Fringe and the Southern Fringe and the biomedical campus were not then even under consideration. The route has now had increasing support from all quarters, and the significance of such provision will be all the more valuable in the new normal when active travel must be promoted and CO2 and other pollutants vastly reduced. Planning permission was granted in July 2017. It should not have taken 3.5 years to build, yet no section has even been completed. I ask that the board recognises the value of this project to all in and around Cambridge by continuing to fund it. I also ask that the governance of similar future schemes be such that an integrated plan can enable completion in a more reasonable timescale. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Wilma. Peter, would you like to respond to those two questions, please?
Yes, Chair. So in response to Roxanne's questions, Coldham's Common, construction will commence before the 15th of January date as required. In terms of Newmarket Road, works will commence in spring 2021, and there is a provisional road closure date of Newmarket Road of late March and early April in the diary at the moment. Coldham's Lane crossing represents the start of phase 2 of the trail. And the report recommendations require GCP officers to revise delivery arrangements for phase 2 of the project in light of the issues to date. This will be brought back to a future meeting of the board, and I will update on the timeline at that point. And the reason why these elements haven't been delivered at the moment is because there's been a focus on phase 1 and the issues raised in that. In terms of Jim Chisholm's question, the recommendations do seek to reaffirm the GCP's support for the delivery of the scheme and addressing the financial challenges that have been raised. And again, the recommendation also requires GCP officers to revise delivery arrangements, and that will be a matter that we'll raise in the substantive report, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. Tim Bick, you wanted to come in on this one.
Yes, Chair, if that's in order, because the Assembly did not get a chance to comment on this because of the timescale that Peter.
I would never stop you from speaking, Councillor Bick.
Thank you. Well, I'd first of all hear to what Roxanne and Jim have said in their questions, and of course, I'm sure the Assembly wants to see the Chisholm Trail delivered as soon as possible. But I think someone has to express horror at this overspend. I've no idea from reading the report whether we're looking at a poor initial costing or poor cost management during the project, but the effect of it is to shake public confidence in developments of this kind, and that really would be tragic because we need our cycling schemes, and we've seen the same thing happening at the County Council with their Fendon Road roundabout scheme, which was also largely driven by improved cycling. We really have to eradicate this sort of the questionable numbers on which we appear to be taking decisions. in a commercial world, I guess you'd want to have the organisation responsible for the errors bear the cost. But obviously, in the environment we're operating, it's always going to be the public that that has to foot the bill here, and they would suffer anyway. But it's clear from other items on our agenda that money in the GCP is heavily competed for. We've discussed this several times through the agenda, and knowing the costs of things that we undertake up front is absolutely critical for good planning and good resource allocation. And I do think that we've been really let down. And I suppose it sounds such a limp question to ask, but it's the only one I can think of that is the really cogent one, is what steps are being taken to stop this happening again?
Okay, thank you, Tim. So moving on, Peter, and maybe you'll pick up Tim's question as well. Would you like to introduce the report?
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and do that. Members will be aware of the recent County Council Highway and Transport report regarding delivery of the project, and it's appended to the report in front of you. County officers have raised financial and programme issues with delivery of the scheme for the reasons outlined. Our report seeks to try and address that in terms of emphasising the importance to Greater Cambridge and the Greater Cambridge Partnership of the Chisholm Trail scheme and what it delivers. And I think Roxanne and Jim have sort of outlined that very effectively. The recommendation reflect the GCP's desire to ensure that this is successfully delivered. And that means in terms of addressing the financial shortfall in terms of the bridge, and also an additional allocation required to complete the trail. And finally, the recommendations would also require officers to bring forward alternate proposals for delivery of phase 2 of the trail in light of the experiences to date. And hopefully that will answer Tim Bick's point, Chair, but I'm happy to try and answer any questions.
Thank you, Peter. Lewis.
Well, it's a sorry tale, and I don't think the tale is properly told by the paperwork in front of us. I listened into the county's Highways and Transport Committee, and I expected greater challenge. Presumably, they thought we were going to bail it all out. I'm not really happy at leaving it here. Of course, I want to build the Chisholm Trail, but this is £8.6 million, £2 million for the bridge and 6.6 million for the 6.6 million for the trail. It's a relatively no project is simple, but in transport terms, given how complex they can be, it's a relatively straightforward project, particularly the Chisholm Trail part. I accept that we need to approve proceeding with the Chisholm Trail, but I want to add a further recommendation, and that we ask for a fuller report on exactly what happened and what it's going to mean for our future contracting to the March meeting. I don't think, given that we are the people approving £8.6 million of spend, that we can just approve this without actually having a further report, Chair. Sorry, I realise there are issues there, but the broader issue then is, who does the GCP contract to deliver projects like this in the future? And I think that has to be an open question until we actually review exactly what's happened here. And I do think that this information needs to be in the public domain. This is £8.6 million, as Councillor Bick said, that is no longer going to be available for other Greater Cambridge Partnership priorities. So I know that we like to, in the Britain, to have this phrase, what can we do to ensure it never happens again? But I am moving that we add a further recommendation for a fuller report on exactly what the lessons are from this, because it must not happen again. We haven't got money sitting around to keep spending £8.6 million. So I hope you'll agree, Chair, that we ask for a further report on exactly what's happened here and on what our contracting methods are going to be to ensure that this cannot, not must not, happen again.
Okay, Lewis, thank you for that. Neil?
Sorry, you caught me out. So yeah, clearly this is shocking in terms of the outcome here. I have a question though in the first instance for Peter. The third part of the recommendation, which is the additional 4.8 million to the project plus an allocation of 1.8 million as contingency, is that really a contingency? In the sense that there's no expectation that it will be spent, it's just there as insurance, or is there more to it than the 1.8 million?
Peter, does contingency really mean contingency, I think?
Thank you, Roger. It's late at night there. Thank you very much.
The costed risk that has been received from county officers is the substantive total, but they are not absolutely sure that that will be the final figure. So they and I have added a contingency figure, so this is dealt with. I think it's absolutely right that contingency is reported separately. So if we go above the substantive £4.7 million figure, then we should clearly be reporting back to you the additional cost of that and the money that's come out of the contingency.
And can I have just a follow-up question then, Pete, if I may, Chair? Can I? So what sort of risks then, Peter, is that covering? Given the stage we're at and what we've learned so far, what lies ahead which led you to kind of suggest that contingency? So
the big outstanding risk is Newmarket Road. We're going to, the project team is going to punch a hole under Newmarket Road, and it might find anything. There may well be problems that are unforeseen. And whilst there is a costed risk for that, the experience on the project thus far is that they haven't been adequately reflected within the finances.
Okay, so thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you, Peter, for that. I guess I just perhaps would suggest we think very carefully about the release of that contingency too, as well.
I think Neil, that's exactly what Peter was suggesting. And I've got to agree with you. Far too often you see contingency, and to me it says, you spend if you hit a snag or you need to. And to others, it seems like, well, how do we spend that contingency? So I think Peter's suggesting, as long as that's okay with you, Neil, and others, that if any of that contingency is spent, we need to know exactly why. Is that what you're suggesting, Peter?
Absolutely right, Chair. That any money spent out of that contingency is reported to you separately.
Okay, thank you. Claire, you did have your hand up, but then took it down. Are you okay?
It probably just took a long time. Just quickly, so this is a serious situation. I'm not hugely impressed, as nobody is. We did start at risk because of the generally highly accepted benefit that we could see for active and low carbon travel. We might even have agreed this higher budget, so we should take things in perspective. The biggest disappointment is obviously in the project management and the communication, and we would expect there to be some repercussions from that. So a second report may do that, but if something's already happening, then that's not necessary for us to comment. I would like three things. One is for parts of this route to be finished in an agile way, so it can be used rather than having the whole route 80% finished and unusable for the rest of the project. Two, I would quite like GCP to take on the project management of this because I think we have a strong team. I don't know whether we've got the resources, but that would be a thought for taking it forward. And three, contingency backup in a project. If I was running this, I would probably put an exploratory tunnel under Newmarket Road, which is right by the Leper Chapel and therefore quite high risk. but with a backup of the Pelican Crossing into Ditton Fields as a very low cost backup if it looked like there was significant cost going under Newmarket Road, which I know is the ideal. I know the equipment is all lined up there already, but it is one of the more expensive parts of this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Neil, are you wanting to come back?
If I may, Chair, I was just going to say that I would actually support Lewis's suggestion that in March maybe we should have a review of what the implications of this are, in terms of how we might do things differently going forward.
Okay, thank you. So what I have here obviously is recommendations A to D, but we're going to add a recommendation E, and from what I'm gathering from the board, we would like a full report on what's been done to make sure this doesn't happen again, and also any options we have going forward. Would that cover Lewis and Neil? I'm trying to get the wording right. Lewis?
Well, I'm happy with general wording, but I just would like us to make sure that we actually have the detailed report. So I think what we need to do is we need to have a report that both identifies fully the reasons for this overspend, but also adopting Neil's wording, Chair, reports on the implications of this this need to fund an extra 8.6 million for the GCP and how we take project management forward on this project and also on other future projects.
Okay, so
I'm not pointing the finger at our GCP team, but I just think that we've got to be clear that if we are contracting, whoever we're contracting, that we have a clarity of in terms of who's liable. And I'm not sure that we've been tough enough in some ways, but at the same time, I realise that the only way to get the Chisholm Trail built is to agree the core recommendation, but to bring a report back next meeting, please.
Yeah, I've got it, and hopefully this is agreement of everyone. So a report which will contain the reasons for overspend and the implications for the additional funding, and also project management going forward for the GCP. Would that make sense to everyone?
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I've got agreement from, I assume I need a proposer and a seconder. Lewis, will you propose and Neil second?
Propose, thank you.
And I'm happy to second.
Okay, great, thank you. And have we, Dan, have you got, sorry, Nick, have you got the wording for that? Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so I've got no one else that wishes to speak. So I've got recommendations A to D with an additional E. All those, well, I'll take them on block again, and I'll ask anyone that disagrees, please raise. Oh, Neil.
Sorry, I know it's late, Roger. Can I just make that what Peter said was going to happen with that contingency is implicit in what we would.
And it's yes, he said it to us.
Yeah. Good.
Okay. So recommendations A to E now. All those. Sorry, anyone that disagrees, please raise your blue hand. There's no blue hands, so that is carried by affirmation. So thank you very much, everyone. And actually, that is our last agenda item, and it brings this meeting to a close. And thank you, everyone. I'm not used to doing such long meetings. I have a reputation to keep, but it was necessary and very important in this time.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you to the whole officer team and for the inputs, including from James.
Absolutely.